Chapter 245. He never denied his admiration for this woman. Maybe it was because of Mingzhu, or maybe it was because of those admirers, but he never really took women seriously. He always felt that although their talents weren't inferior to men's, they often had too many messy things in their hearts. Except for a few, they weren't suitable for cultivation. However, Mo Tiange was the only one he felt was special. She was diligent. Even when her talent was extremely poor, she didn't feel remorse. Instead, she worked twice as hard as others. Even after she found out her talent was outstanding, she still didn't slack off. She was serious. Ever since he met her, he'd never seen her put her mind on other messy things. She only seriously cultivated and seriously walked her own path. She loved herself. Ever since she was a little aura-refining cultivator with nothing to her name, if she wanted to go further on the path to immortality, she always worked hard on her own and never sold her own pride and self-respect. She also had some wisdom. Although she still made mistakes and took the wrong path, she always learned from them. Ever since he met her, she was just an insignificant little cultivator in Kunwu, but she slowly grew to become a real elite disciple of a big cultivation group today. Her efforts and persistence never changed, but her experience and way of dealing with things were growing. Although he himself helped her a little, her talent and hard work were also undeniable. In fact, in a way, she was very lucky. He thought she had trash spiritual roots, but it turned out she was a genius. Moreover, she was favored by deification cultivators and obtained some rare treasures. However, her own efforts were worthy of this kind of result. In fact, which of the cultivators who could reach this far weren't the result of hard work and luck? His master could be considered unlucky. He had to rely on his own cultivation to make realm breakthroughs, but he had many rare treasures for fights of magical power, and these were also the foundation of his status. Martial Uncle Zhenyang, Martial Uncle Miaoyi, and Master Song Feng, who had a grudge against them, which one of them hadn't encountered fated chances and obtained rare treasures? This included Qin Mu himself. Everyone in West Kunwu said that Qin Shoujing was a rare genius in the celestial pole, but what was the truth? He had dual spiritual roots. Even if both spiritual roots were excellent, how could he compare to those true geniuses with single spiritual roots or mutated spiritual roots? Even if he was simple-minded and never encountered bottlenecks, it was still the same. Before he built his foundation, it was indeed the result of his own efforts, but he also couldn't have done without his master's help. After reaching the foundation establishment realm, he often went out, both to temper his mental state and to seek opportunities. Because he felt that he could not rely on his master for the rest of his life. His luck wasn't bad, and he was also alert enough. Therefore, he smoothly encountered many fated chances and obtained many spiritual treasures, including the Yang spiritual bead and the 3 Yang real fire sword. He formed his gold core at the age of 78. Those who didn't know would be surprised that he, a cultivator with 2 spiritual roots, could reach this level. But in reality, it was because he had obtained the Yang spiritual bead. The Yang spiritual bead was a kind of unique treasure condensed from the spiritual aura of heaven and earth. In itself, it was condensed from extremely pure Yang spiritual aura. Although it was small, it had sucked dry a certain spiritual vein in Kunwu, turning it into an ordinary mountain peak without any spiritual aura at all. Then, it was buried somewhere for tens of thousands of years before he found it. Therefore, after obtaining the Yang spiritual bead, he didn't need to absorb spiritual qi from the outside world anymore, because in a way, he already had an entire spiritual vein inside his body. Such a rare treasure allowed his cultivation to advance by leaps and bounds, allowing him to smoothly advance to the core formation realm at the mere age of 78. However, if it was another person, would they definitely be able to obtain these treasures and encounter these opportunities? Sometimes, even if there were opportunities and rare treasures in front of them, those who didn't work hard still wouldn't be able to obtain them. Those who didn't know how to work hard but were always superior to those whose cultivation levels were higher than theirs because of their natural endowments or opportunities, or those who didn't work hard because they had outstanding natural endowments, would never understand these principles. Therefore, from a certain point of view, he admired this woman because she allowed him to see himself. His master told him that opposites or similar people would easily become curious about each other, and curiosity was the first step to developing feelings for each other. He didn't believe it at first, but now he had no choice but to believe it. When did he start to see her as a woman instead of a child? Perhaps it was when he came to Xianqing school and regained his original identity, or perhaps it was during those long 35 years. He wanted to recall, but he found he couldn't remember clearly. Sometimes, he even felt that these feelings seemed to have no reason at all and suddenly arose. Because he admired her, he was curious. Because he was curious, he paid attention to her. Because he paid attention to her, he put more thoughts into his mind. When he put more thoughts into his mind, in the end, he couldn't bear to let go. Sometimes, when he carefully thought about it, perhaps it was because she had already grown up when they met, right? Their meeting was 7 years late, giving her enough time to grow up. Therefore, in the beginning, although he still thought about this child, he was very clear in his heart that she had already grown up and wasn't a child anymore. She regarded him as a cultivator in the same realm and would joke with him, share some of her experiences, and even talk about some of her worries. This kind of relaxed and pleasant feeling made him happy. The reason he subconsciously wanted to conceal his identity was also because he liked this feeling of equality between them. He always felt that if he told the truth, the distance between them would suddenly become far apart, and she would no longer have that kind of trust in him. He told Zhong Muling that if he didn't conceal his identity, she wouldn't stay at Xianqing school. Yes, this was one of the reasons. At that time, she was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. If she knew his true identity, she probably would have tried every means to escape, right? She could trust Qin Shi a little, but she couldn't trust Qin Shoujing wholeheartedly, especially when she escaped like that back then. When he saved her during the demonic beast riot, he didn't think too much about it. In the end, did he have any extra feelings for her at that time? It seemed like too much time had passed, so he somewhat couldn't remember. However, he was certain that at that time, he didn't have any thoughts of dual cultivation. He wouldn't take a fancy to a cultivator who had just built her foundation, even if she was extraordinarily talented. A gap of more than 100 years was nothing in the eyes of cultivators, and he also wasn't related to her by blood. Even he and her father were nothing more than companions. Although they were close friends, in reality, there was still a gap of more than 100 years between them. Was it because of seniority? For cultivators, this was a problem that simply didn't exist. There was only one thing he couldn't ignore, the gap between their cultivation levels. He patiently pondered, searching for traces of the past in the depths of his heart, but he soon discovered that the reason was so simple. He wasn't a transcendent being. The utilitarian nature of cultivators was deeply buried in his bones and blood. Even if he had a good impression of her, he, Qin Shoujing, the future hope of Xianqing school, wouldn't want to marry a woman who had just built her foundation and whose path to immortality was unknown. These were the fragments he picked up when he recalled them today. Back then, he never thought about them. Later, when he entered the virtual sky world and met those two deification cultivators, he once again suffered that kind of humiliation. He originally thought he was looking at her from a high place, so he had a bit of a good impression of her, but he couldn't convince himself to let go of his cultivation level. As it turned out, in other people's eyes, he was only a furnace. Furnace, these two words were the greatest humiliation to a man. It was even more so for Qin Shoujing, who thought highly of himself and considered everyone beneath him. Therefore, he cultivated like crazy, wanting to let those two know that he, Qin Shoujing, would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, even surpass them, and eventually step into the great Tao. However, his master said that he'd entered his own demonic barrier and told him to think carefully about the innocence he had when he first started cultivating. At that time, he didn't cultivate for any reason, he just wanted to cultivate, that's all. Therefore, he didn't have any encumbrances or obsessions, he just cultivated wholeheartedly. But now, he didn't. These past few years, it wasn't that he didn't know his state of mind had changed. He was no longer the Qin Shoujing who didn't have any extra feelings, didn't know the taste of obsessions, had a pure heart and few desires, and had a pure Dao heart. However, once he changed, how could he return to his original innocence? He tried to calm himself down, and thus, he went into seclusion for 35 years. In these 35 years, he had actually fallen into the trap he set up, and in the end, he firmly trapped himself. The more he wanted to prove himself, the more he loved her in his imagination. Thus, he was plagued by obsessions, and the demonic barrier was difficult to get rid of. Today, he slowly sorted out these thoughts that he had never thought about in the past from the corners of his memories, no matter how difficult it was to speak of these thoughts of the past. He originally thought that he would be like this for the rest of his life, immersed in the Tao of immortality, lonely all his life, and finally stepping onto the supreme great Tao. Or perhaps, he would truly fall in love with a woman, no matter what her identity or status was, accompanying her until the end of his life and passing away together. However, as it turned out, he wasn't as pure and simple as he thought he was, and he wasn't as noble and virtuous as he thought he was. He developed feelings for a woman, but because he was limited by his cultivation, he enjoyed the feeling of superiority from looking down on her. Because his self-esteem and this feeling of superiority had been violated, he cultivated madly so that he could look down on her again. Why did he have such a dark mood? Perhaps it was because he couldn't let go of her, but he couldn't let go of his laughable self-esteem even more. He didn't want to admit that he was the one who had fallen in love first. Or perhaps, he had always been so utilitarian, no different from those other cultivators. Master was right. He had entered the demonic barrier, thinking that if he focused on cultivating until he reached the nascent soul realm, he would be able to break away from these unspeakable darkness. But in reality, this was just putting the cart before the horse. However, even if he understood his own heart, he still wouldn't say these words now. If he said them now, how was it different from wanting to use her? If he couldn't form a nascent soul, he wanted to obtain her so that he could break away from his obsession and smoothly form a nascent soul? He didn't want to do such a lowly thing, and he wasn't even willing to have the slightest bit of relationship with her. This was the last bit of perseverance he could achieve after admitting to all his darkness. The great Tao of immortality, in the end, had to be walked by oneself. How could he place his hopes on unorthodox methods? Even if he loved her, cultivating to become an immortal was still his lifelong wish. And she, in all likelihood, wouldn't want a relationship that was mixed with utilitarian feelings. Therefore, if she loved him, if she couldn't let go, then she would wait until he formed a nascent soul and she formed a gold core. Then, she would simply ask, "Are you willing to explore the Tao of immortality together?" If she was willing, then his long-cherished wish could be fulfilled. If she wasn't willing, then he wouldn't have any fate in this lifetime. Chapter 246. After an unknown period of time, the laughter of women rang out in Enchanting Palace. Several young and beautiful female building foundation realm cultivators ran over while laughing and fooling around. Just as they were about to run to Mingxin residence, they suddenly stopped in astonishment and looked at the man who was sitting on the railing, as if he had become one with the stone pillar carved with a dragon. Martial Uncle Shou Jing? Xianshu blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Dai Hua exchanged a glance with her, then turned to look at Shuqin and Qingqi. Qingqi finally moved. He swept his gaze over them and said, "Do you know what happened?" His expression was very cold. The four female cultivators were silent for a while, not daring to answer. Shuqin said cautiously, "We heard Martial Uncle Mo had an accident inside the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation. Since you already know, why are you still making such a ruckus?" There was absolutely no blame in his tone, only indifference like a stone pillar. It was still the eldest of the four, Shuqin, who said, "Yes, we will be careful in the future." He didn't say anything more. He turned his head and closed his eyes, as if he didn't want to care about anything else. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua looked at each other, bowed, and carefully walked towards Ming Xan residence. Wait. The four of them felt their hearts skip a beat. Although Uncle Shoujing normally didn't like to smile, he was still very amiable. Today, he was truly frightening, even more frightening than their grandmaster. Xiuqin asked softly, Martial Uncle Shoujing, do you have any other instructions? Qin Shi didn't even turn his head. He said faintly, Mingzhu was also injured. Did you see her? Yes, Mame and the others are behind us. They will bring senior sister Wan back soon. He waved his hand behind him. You guys can go. The four of them cautiously walked towards Mingxin residence. Upon discovering that Martial Uncle Mo's formation wasn't activated, they quietly walked inside. After entering the courtyard, Xian Shu whispered, what happened to Martial Uncle Shoujing? How terrifying. Who knew? Qingqi frowned. Suddenly, she was surprised. Martial Uncle Shoujing appeared here. Did he come out of seclusion? Dai Hua was deep in thought. Didn't they say that it was a closed-door seclusion? I thought I was seeing things. Why did Martial Uncle Shoujing come out? It's one thing for you to come out, but why are you still sitting here in a daze? Xian Shu was confused. Qingqi said, maybe. Martial Uncle Shoujing wanted to go back to Mingxin residence, but in the end, he remembered Martial Uncle Mo was living here now. Xiuqin said, nonsense, ever since Martial Uncle Shoujing moved out, how many times has he come back? Didn't you follow me to the main hall and leave after talking to Grandmaster? That's true, Xianshu's eyes shifted about. She then moved closer and whispered, did you guys hear? Today, it was Martial Uncle Shoujing who suddenly went to the bottom of the valley on the main peak and brought Martial Uncle Mo back. Ah! Dai Hua cried out in alarm. Realizing that she was too loud, she hurriedly covered her mouth and whispered, I came out late. I don't know. What's going on? I don't know, said Leisure. That's all I've heard. It reminds me of a rumor from decades ago. The four of them looked at each other and knew what each other wanted to say. Qingqi rubbed her chin and said, I thought it was just a rumor. There must be a reason for the groundless rumors. Leisure smiled. We've been serving Grandmaster for almost 100 years. How could we not know about Martial Uncle Shoujing's matters? Martial Uncle Mo was accepted by Grandmaster because of Martial Uncle Shoujing. Moreover, back then, don't you think Martial Uncle Shoujing really treated her much better than other people? You're right, Dai Hua said, but I still don't believe it. How could Martial Uncle Shoujing possibly, otherwise, why would he be standing guard outside now? Think about Martial Uncle Shoujing's appearance just now. When have we ever seen him sitting on the railing so casually and in a daze? Leisure continued to speak in an enigmatic manner. In my opinion, that's most likely the case. Dai Hua said, aren't you thinking too much? We've been by Grandmaster's side for so many years, but when have we ever seen anyone with a more resolute Dao heart than Martial Uncle Shoujing? That's true. Leisure shook her head, overturning what she just said. In any case, it's none of our business. In the end, it was Xiuqin who spoke. Enough. Martial Uncle Shoujing just taught you a lesson, but you still have so much to say. Did he not teach you enough? Leisure hastily shut her mouth. Qingqi muttered, We just laughed a few times, but Martial Uncle Shoujing taught us that much. It's not like we didn't, Martial Uncle Mo's injured. Xiuqin stopped her from continuing. Grandmaster treats us generously, but we can't be lazy with what we should do. I heard Martial Uncle Mo's injuries are quite serious, but we're still laughing. Aren't we just looking for trouble for others? It's fine if you didn't see it, but since you said it, we should restrain ourselves a bit. The other three nodded and sighed, then followed Xiuqin back to the small house. In fact, it was no wonder they were still laughing and joking after returning. Although they knew Martial Uncle Mo was injured, her life wasn't in danger, so Grandmaster didn't take it seriously. Besides, although they didn't dare to disobey Martial Uncle Mo, they didn't have any friendship with her. However, Xiuqin's words were obviously nonsense, but the meaning behind her words was rather thought-provoking. They're happy, but others feel uncomfortable. Is it because Martial Uncle Mo's injured? The four of them couldn't help but think about this. She sat in a daze for a while. During that time, he saw Mame and the others really brought Wan Mingzhu back. Now that the masters of Mingxin residence and Zhili house were in trouble, the maids of Shangqing Palace lamented their bad luck, but they were also helpless. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua were the closest to Mingxin residence, so it was always the four of them who took care of all the chores in Mingxin residence. As for Zhili house, although Wan Mingzhu hadn't been in Mount Taikang for a long time, her identity was still there, so Mei, Lan, Zhu, and Zhu had no choice but to take care of her. The sex trial this time practically turned the high-purity palace upside down. Qin she couldn't sit still after being stared at by the maids with strange gazes again and again. He stood up and slowly walked towards the main hall. But as soon as he stepped into the main hall, he regretted it. There was only Lord Daoist Jinghe at the scene, seemingly waiting for him. Qin she thought about it and didn't escape. Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe seemed a bit surprised. He glanced at Qin Shi and said, "What took you so long?" "I was sitting and thinking about something." "Thinking about something?" Lord Daoist Jinghe's eyes brightened. "Thinking about what?" Qin Shi didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a chair and sat down, staring blankly again. Although he already figured it out, he still wasn't used to this kind of state. His heart was full of miscellaneous things, but it turned out to be like this. In that case, sometimes women couldn't be blamed. Women were always more sentimental, and some things couldn't be controlled once they started. However, he had always been strong-willed. Since he'd decided to do something, he wouldn't hesitate anymore. "Master, why do you care so much?" he said faintly. "Brat." Lord Daoist Jinghe blew his beard and glared at him. "How can you talk to your master like this? If I don't talk to you like this, you'll feel uncomfortable all over, right?" It was rare for Lord Daoist Jinghe to be silent. He pondered for a while then said, "Brat, you're not in the right mood today. You know, but you still provoke me." Qin she didn't hide it. In any case, he'd already done some things clearly enough. Rather than being laughed at by this dirty old man, he'd better be frank. Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't speak for a long time, but his eyes kept sizing him up. After a while, he smiled. "Brat, you finally figured it out?" Qin she didn't evade. He stared at the void and said faintly, "Master, what else do you want to ask? Just say it all at once." The calmer his attitude was, the happier Lord Daoist Jinghe was. This meant this brat had made up his mind. "Tell me your plan first." He couldn't stop smiling. "In fact, although there's a gap between the two of you in cultivation, it's not big. Whether it's Qingge's mental state or cultivation level, the conditions for her to form her gold core are ripe. As soon as she forms her gold core, you'll be cultivators in the same realm as her. As for you advancing to the nascent soul realm in the future, she'll just be a bit slower. You don't have to. I want to advance to the nascent soul realm." Qin she interrupted him. Lord Daoist Jinghe was interrupted halfway, so he shouted, "What did you say? You still haven't given up? Haven't you figured it out?" Qin she looked down at the teacup in his hand. His gaze was gentle, but his tone was firm. "I won't tell you unless I advance to the nascent soul realm." "You," Lord Daoist Jinghe almost choked. After a long time, he whispered, "What are you doing?" Qin she said softly, "If I tell you now, what would it look like? Would I demand repayment? Or would I use my power to oppress others?" Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about? This kind of thing is consensual. If Qingge isn't willing, she can just refuse. We won't force her to do anything. But what will she think?" Qin she lowered his head. "Yes, master, you've had a good relationship with her all these years, but no matter how good your relationship is, she's always on guard against others in her heart. Master, she's about to form her gold core now, so you better not disturb her mood." Lord Daoist Jinghe was silent for a long time. In the end, he sighed. But have you ever thought that if you form your nascent soul, she'll be even further away from you? Qin Shi's hand moved, but he didn't raise his head. Lord Daoist Jinghe continued to say, all these years, I've more or less learned about her temperament. The pride in Tiange's heart isn't any less than yours. You don't want to use her, but isn't she the same? Therefore, the higher your cultivation level is, the further away she'll be from you. Qin Shi didn't speak for a long time, but Lord Daoist Jinghe saw his hand trembling slightly. After a long time, he asked, what do you think, Master? She'll need at least 10 or 20 years to form her gold core, right? Am I supposed to stop cultivating and wait until she catches up to me? Lord Daoist Jinghe chuckled. Child, are you stupid? Wait until you two succeed, then you form your nascent soul. Do you think she'll go back on her words? Qin Shi didn't nod. He seemed to be thinking. After going back and forth several times, he finally said, then I'll wait. In any case, she'll form her nascent soul in 200 years at most. I still have a lot of time, so I can wait slowly. Lord Daoist Jinghe choked. He didn't expect Qin Shi would make such a decision in the end. But after pondering for a long time, he finally didn't object and said, fine, maybe this is the best way. Even if she forms her gold core now, there's still a big gap between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm. But after she forms her nascent soul, she probably won't have any other ideas. At this point, Lord Daoist Jinghe looked up with an inscrutable expression. But are you really willing to wait 200 years? Chapter 247. Yizhenji was very gloomy, and he couldn't describe the gloominess in his heart. He felt like he was cheated, but no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't tell where he was cheated. He just felt full of grievances and couldn't be motivated to do anything. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you in a daze during a fight of magical power? The youth opposite him, who was about the same age and cultivation level as him, shouted in dissatisfaction. Yizhenji frowned and felt impatient, so he simply abandoned his magic tool and sat on a rock next to him, lowering his head in anger. Hualing walked over and asked in confusion, what's wrong with you? Are you in a bad mood? Yizhenji frowned and said gloomily, I'm very annoyed. Annoyed? Hualing thought for a moment then said, because of your aunt? Didn't Grandmaster say she's fine? What are you worried about? It's not about that. Although his aunt hadn't woken up yet, his master said she was fine, so he wasn't worried. However, seeing his master coming out of closed-door meditation and busily doing this and that, he felt annoyed. Why did he feel uncomfortable? Whether it was his master or his aunt, they were both people he respected and loved. Wasn't it better if his master treated his aunt well? Although this was what his rationality told him, he was still very unhappy. Perhaps he thought he was the closest person to them, but in the end, he was completely kept in the dark. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, whether it was when he was with his aunt, when his aunt mentioned his master or when his master mentioned his aunt, their expressions were a bit strange. However, at that time, he didn't think there was any relationship between them. What's bothering you? Is there something you can't tell me? Yizhenji glanced at Hualing, thought for a moment then said, then I'll tell you, but you mustn't tell anyone. Hualing raised his eyebrows. Of course. What's our relationship? Yizhenji pondered in his heart then said slowly, I suspect there's something between my aunt and my master. Oh. Your aunt and your master. Ah. Hualing nodded, but halfway through his thought, he realized something was wrong and shouted. He thought for a moment then leaned over and whispered, that's impossible, right? Don't they rarely see each other? I thought so too. Yizhenji sat there with a distressed expression. But when my aunt had an accident in the 10,000 laws of nature formation, the first person she sensed was actually master. Hualing was a bit stunned. No way. Why else would I be depressed? Yizhenji said listlessly, besides, after Auntie had an accident, Master was so nervous, and Grandmaster said some strange things. Hualing thought for a moment then said, even if it's true, what's there to be depressed about? Your master and your aunt are both close to you. Isn't it good for them to be together? You can say that. In fact, Yizhenji also didn't understand what he was feeling gloomy about. He just felt irritated, especially when he saw his master helping his aunt nourish her body with a cultivation technique every day and also searching everywhere for spiritual plants to concoct medicinal pills. Whenever he saw this, he felt very irritated and found his master very unpleasant to the eye. However, after she said that to Hualing found it funny. Do you feel like you're being left out? Yizhenji froze. Hualing continued, ever since you were brought back by your aunt, whether it was with your aunt or with your master, you've always been their only disciple. They've always treated you extremely well, so you've always felt very happy because the person they value the most is you. But now, you realize that they, who you thought valued the most, are hiding such an important thing from you, which makes you feel like you're not that important. Yizhenji frowned, but he couldn't say that Hualing was wrong. I don't know. In any case, whenever I see Master now, I feel annoyed and don't want to go back. Seeing his appearance, Hualing found it a bit funny. In fact, you're just jealous, aren't you? Yizhenji didn't say anything. He just lowered his head and said nothing. Hualing sat down next to him and said, Do you think your master took your aunt away? Yizhenji was silent for a while, then answered honestly, a little bit. Hualing smiled. Because you've always respected your master, so when you found out he carried you, from the beginning to the end, he didn't ask you about it, so you suddenly felt he was very annoying, right? Without waiting for Yizhenji's answer, Hualing already had an answer in his heart. He patted Yizhenji's shoulder and said, Get over it. We can't meddle too much in the affairs of our elders. Besides, your master was so good to you, in all fairness, did he ever let you down? After thinking for a while, Yizhenji answered honestly, no. Then he immediately added, But I still feel uncomfortable. Hualing shook his head. In that case, let me ask you this, if you didn't find out about this, would you want your master and your aunt to be together? This time, Yizhenji thought for a long time. After a while, he finally said, I originally thought that since I wanted to be with both my aunt and my master, it'd be good if they lived together. But those are two different things. Hualing found it funny. You want them to live together, but you don't want them to have a special relationship because you think you're the person they care about the most, even if both of them can't take away your position, right? Besides, are you worried that if that happened, your position in their hearts would be pushed back? Do you think you'd be redundant? Upon seeing Yizhenji's lowered head, Hualing smiled. Brother, we're already in our 40s. Although we're cultivators and our lifespans are much longer, we're not children anymore. Why are you still so awkward? Yizhenji glared at him and said unwillingly, You said it clearly, but where did you find out? Hualing said, Before I was 10 years old, when I was with my parents, I often thought that way. My parents had a very good relationship, so at that time, I often felt I was redundant when they were together. As he talked about his childhood, he smiled and glanced at Yizhenji. But now that I've grown up, I feel I was really childish back then. Shouldn't I be happy that my parents had a good relationship? Their feelings for each other were different from their feelings for me. No matter how good they were, I was still the most important person to them. Yizhenji was still full of reluctance, but he felt what Hualing said was right, so he muttered, But master didn't even tell me, why would he tell you about this kind of thing? Hualing looked at him in confusion. You're their junior, not their elder. How could he explain this to a junior? Yizhenji was at a loss for words and was rendered speechless. Rationally speaking, he felt that what Hualing said was right. But emotionally speaking, he still felt very, very unhappy. Hualing patted him on the back. Brat, you're in your 40s now, not in your teens, okay? You've cultivated too much that you've become stupid, haven't you? Yizhenji pushed his hand away. In any case, I still feel unhappy. If you're unhappy, go talk to your master. Since he'd already said it, Hualing couldn't do anything else. After thinking for a moment, he leaned closer and smiled slyly. In fact, I think you might as well find yourself a little wife. That way, someone will get tired of you, and you won't have time to be unhappy. Go away. Yizhenji pushed him away. What nonsense are you talking about? Hualing said with a smile, this is a sincere suggestion. Although our Dao school doesn't advocate it, dual cultivation is, after all, a good thing. Look at your master, he's so old, but isn't he? My master isn't old. He's only 175 years old, okay? He's already very young for a core formation cultivator, let alone he's about to form his nascent soul. Hualing found it even more funny. Just now, you said you didn't like your master, so why are you defending him now? Yizhenji was speechless. Youngsters. Hualing pretended to be mature. Why are you so awkward? Yizhenji lowered his head and didn't refute. Hualing's words made him feel a little awkward. He didn't allow others to talk about his master, but he himself didn't like his master. I reckon it's useless to say anything now. In fact, it's not that you don't understand, you're just unhappy, aren't you? Yizhenji sighed. Yes, you're right. In fact, I have a sincere suggestion, Hualing said very seriously. You better find yourself a little wife. Yizhenji slapped him with his palm. Nonsense. Hualing couldn't help but laugh as he said, in fact, I think the most important thing for you is to be angry at your master. On the contrary, you're not that angry at your aunt, am I right? Nonsense. My aunt's still asleep. It's not like it has much to do with her, but didn't you say it just now? Your aunt doesn't seem to be completely innocent, right? Hualing, who was observant, smiled. Don't you think so? Your feelings for your aunt aren't ordinary. Yizhenji understood the meaning of his words. He glared at him and said sternly, don't talk nonsense. Aunt is my aunt. I've always regarded her as my master and respected her as an elder. I didn't mean that. Hualing hastily explained, what I meant was, ever since you were a child, your aunt has been the female elder closest to you. She also treats you very well, so you must have thought women should be like your aunt. It's also because of this that you think your master is annoying, right? Yizhenji was stunned. He never thought about this aspect. But when he thought about it carefully, it seemed to be the case. If there was a woman, it would naturally be best if she was like his aunt. In fact, your aunt is only an image in your heart. Before you have a definite lover, you'll probably think of your aunt as an image, so in your heart, you actually regard your master as your love rival. Nonsense. Love rival or whatnot, that's too much. Hualing looked at his awkward expression and smiled. In any case, that's what I meant. It's fine as long as you understand. So I think if you find yourself a little wife, you probably won't be like this. Stop. Yizhenji lowered his head and said, before I form my gold core, I won't think about this nonsense. Hualing shrugged, expressing his helplessness. I didn't say you must, it was just a suggestion. In fact, it's not a big deal. Generally speaking, once you grow up, you won't feel that way anymore. You, just haven't grown up yet. Get lost. Yizhenji was annoyed. You're the one who hasn't grown up. Chapter 248. In any case, although Yizhenji felt awkward, he gradually calmed down. He wasn't a child anymore. He understood some things, but he needed time to accept them. Therefore, from the time when she deliberately avoided her master to visit her aunt, she was now able to calmly accompany her master to visit her aunt. Thinking about it carefully, it was probably because he never thought his aunt would become dual cultivation partners with someone else, so he felt so uncomfortable. In fact, if he calmly thought about it, it wouldn't be bad if that person was his master. He wouldn't have any regrets if the two people closest to him were together. In addition, he secretly thought that maybe he should find some time to travel. He remembered that his aunt wasn't much older than he was now, but she was much more experienced in handling things and wouldn't have such silly thoughts as he did. Perhaps he was too inexperienced, so although he wasn't young, his thoughts were still so childish. Master. Yizhenji regained his composure when he saw Qin Shi coming in. Qin Shi nodded and looked at Mo Tiange, who was lying quietly on the bed. How's her condition today? Same as always. Not good, but not bad, Yizhenji said. Qin Shi walked over to her. As usual, he used his spiritual aura to examine her body. He then slowly poured the spiritual aura he'd cultivated using a secret technique into her body, tempering her body to prevent her spiritual aura from decreasing and her body from shrinking. It had been half a month, but Mo Tiange still showed no signs of waking up. Qin Shi, however, discovered one thing during each tempering process. He mainly practiced two cultivation techniques. The first was the art of 3 primordial cycles. He obtained this cultivation technique when he obtained the Yang spiritual bead after he built his foundation. This cultivation technique was said to be closely related to the distant past era. It was based on the 3 primordial auras of heaven and earth, which ancient cultivators believed to be the origin of heaven and earth. If the 3 auras, extreme yang, extreme yin, and neutral, could be combined into one could achieve the great Tao. This cultivation technique was suitable for realm breakthroughs, but it was harsh to practice. Now that he had extreme yang and neutral auras, he only lacked extreme yin. The other cultivation technique was the pure yang technique Yuan Bao gave him. Because he had the yang spiritual bead, he had an endless supply of yang spiritual aura. Now, the pure yang technique had reached the initial stage. The originally weak yin spiritual aura in his body had long disappeared, leaving only pure yang spiritual aura. Every time he poured his pure yang aura into Mo Tiange's body, he discovered that his spiritual aura and Mo Tiange's yin spiritual aura were mutually attracted to each other. It was almost impossible to separate them. Now that she was unconscious, she was naturally unable to control her own spiritual aura. Therefore, the attraction between the 2 spiritual auras was completely instinctive. What was even more miraculous was that every time he finished tempering her body, he would discover that he didn't use up any spiritual energy at all. In fact, it was even slightly more than before. Logically speaking, this kind of situation shouldn't exist. Spirit chi didn't increase out of thin air. Using spirit chi to heal people would only result in a loss, not an increase. However, this kind of situation had indeed happened. He thought about it for a few days, but in the end, he still couldn't figure it out. He furrowed his brows, but from the corner of his eye, he saw Yizhenji sitting listlessly on the side, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Yizhenji raised his head and glanced at her numbly before he lowered his head again. "It's nothing." Qin Shi thought for a moment then asked, "You haven't been very happy lately. It's not just because of your aunt, right?" Upon hearing what he said, Yizhenji became even more dejected. "Master already knows?" Upon seeing his appearance, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh. He walked to Yizhenji's side and sat down, then reached out to stroke his head, causing Yizhenji to shout, "Master, I'm not a child anymore." Qin Shi laughed even harder. "Although you're no longer a child, you still have a child's temperament." Upon hearing what he said, Yizhenji lowered his head and remained silent. Qin Shi sighed. "Master knows you're feeling uncomfortable, but there's no reason for a master to explain himself to his disciple. If you want to know, you can come and ask me." "Why didn't you ask?" Yizhenji lowered his head even more. He naturally knew he was in the wrong. A master and disciple were like father and son. His master usually treated him very well, but a master was still a master. He couldn't be rude to him. "You're not going to ask me now?" "If you're not going to ask me, I'm going to leave." "Master." Yizhenji raised his head. Upon seeing Qin Shi's smiling appearance, he knew he was fooled. He felt annoyed and said, "Master, you're teasing me on purpose." Qin Shi smiled even more happily. He patted Yizhenji's shoulder and said, "Brat, is there anything you can't say? Are you afraid Master will blame you? Or are you blaming Master?" Yizhenji scratched his head and said somewhat embarrassedly, "I think, there's nothing to say." Hualing said, I'm just jealous, and I'll be fine after a while. It seems you've already thought about solving it yourself. She was very gratified. But you won't be reconciled if you don't ask about some things, right? Yizhenji nodded honestly. I actually mind, but after thinking about it, I think Master isn't wrong. I'm too petty. This isn't petty, it's about feelings. She smiled. The fact that you feel awkward shows that whether it's your aunt or your master, you have true feelings for them. However, there are some things Master can't tell you right now. You can ask me after you figure it out, okay? How could Yizhenji have the nerve to say no? There was no reason for a master to explain this kind of thing to his disciple. It was already good enough for his master to talk to him in such a good tone because he was afraid he'd feel depressed. I understand, Master. Good. You can continue to look after your aunt here. When you leave, let Xiuqin and the others guard her. Oh, Yizhenji answered, then asked, Master, are you going to leave now? She smiled and said slowly, your grandmaster found several pill recipes. Maybe they can help your aunt wake up sooner. However, the spiritual medicines on these pill recipes are very rare. In a few days, I'll go out to try my luck, so I have to go back and prepare. Ah. Master, you're going out? Yizhenji looked at him, then at the sleeping Imo on the bed. What about my aunt? She said, with your grandmaster here, what's there to be afraid of? He then warned, when I'm not here, you have to take good care of your aunt. Don't think about trivial things. If there's anything, just look for your grandmaster, understand? Yizhenji pondered for a moment, then swallowed his words of wanting to go with them. His aunt was like this now, and his master was going out to look for medicine. He'd better not cause trouble and wait for his aunt to get better before going out to travel. After watching his master go out, he continued to sit and think with a heavy heart. She walked out of Mingxin residence and went to Zhili house first. Even though he had long been displeased with Ruan Mingzhu, they were still playmates who grew up together and had a very good relationship when they were young. The four people taking care of Ruan Mingzhu were Mei, Lan, Zhu, Ju. The four of them weren't very happy about this task, so they were listless. When they saw him coming, they raised their spirits and saluted him. Martial Uncle Shoujing. She nodded, then asked, how's Mingzhu? Mame answered, Senior Martial Sister Ruan's fine, but she hasn't been answering. She doesn't answer anything I ask. I don't know what she's muttering. Has she regained her consciousness? This. Mame thought about it, then answered, we can't tell. Grandmaster came and said Senior Martial Sister Ruan's 5 confusions plaguing spirit has entered a demonic nightmare. Maybe she understands it in her heart, but she's just unwilling to face it. Maybe she's still muddle-headed and can't distinguish between people and things. She frowned and looked at Ruan Mingzhu, who was sitting on a stool, staring blankly at the corner as if she didn't hear them or notice his arrival. He walked over, then called out, Mingzhu? Ruan Mingzhu didn't move. It seemed she couldn't hear him at all, but she was mumbling something. Mame moved closer and listened for a while, then said, Martial Uncle Shoujing, Senior Martial Sister Ruan is saying she's not Ruan Mingzhu. She was stunned. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he looked at Ruan Mingzhu again, his heart softened a bit. In the beginning, Mingzhu was a very cute little girl. In his boring childhood, the only joy he had was given to him by Mingzhu, so it wasn't like he didn't feel grateful towards her. It was just that later, Mingzhu became more and more ruthless and strange, so the distance between the two of them grew further and further apart. Mingzhu couldn't be blamed for what happened this time. The 5 confusions plaguing spirit itself was a test to lose one's mind. At that time, Ruan Mingzhu hallucinated and did such an outrageous thing. From the perspective of a test, it wasn't wrong. The 5 confusions plaguing spirit originally made people see things they either yearned for or hated. It was just that Imo Tiange happened to appear next to her, which led to this result. Afterward, Master also secretly said that Mingzhu kept saying she didn't want to be Wan Mingzhu and that she wasn't Wan Mingzhu. Perhaps the weakness in her mental state was triggered. As for what exactly had happened in the 10,000 laws of nature formation, they were also gradually able to find out. Maybe it was because she knew she did a lot of things wrong, but she didn't have the courage to face them, so she wanted a new identity. She didn't want to kill Mo Tiange out of jealousy and hatred. She just envied Mo Tiange's identity and everything she had, so she wanted to become Mo Tiange. She wanted to start everything anew, to go back to the time when Wan Mingzhu's mistakes never started. It wasn't like Master didn't feel remorseful when Mingzhu became like this. He said he also had to take responsibility for her becoming like this, but Mingzhu had to bear the consequences alone. He didn't let Mingzhu cultivate a strong heart, but he made her bear the consequences of all her mistakes. She couldn't bear it anymore, so now she completely collapsed. If it was someone else, she felt he could harden his heart and take responsibility for his own life. Besides, it wasn't like they didn't give her a chance. But this person was Mingzhu, so he couldn't bear it. For so many years, he watched step by step as Mingzhu turned from a somewhat mischievous, somewhat delicate, but also kind and adorable little girl into the person she was today. Looking at her today and recalling her initial appearance, how could he be heartless? If at that time, they didn't let her stay in the branch courtyard alone for 60 years and instead patiently taught her, would she have become like this? If they gave her a bit more love and care when she came back, would she have fallen into this situation? Unfortunately, there weren't so many ifs in this world. Senior Marshal Brother. Wan Mingzhu suddenly raised her head and smiled at him. Did you come to see me? Such a pleasant voice didn't belong to the ruthless Wan Mingzhu. She stared at her. For a moment, he couldn't tell whether she had regained her sanity or not. Wan Mingzhu smiled again. She clapped her hands and pointed at the courtyard gate. Senior Marshal Brother, let's go to the back of the mountain. Last time, you said you'd catch an inferno beast for me. Catching an inferno beast for her, that was something they said and did when they were only 13 or 14 years old. Could it be that she'd forgotten everything that happened all these years? She looked around. Mei, Lan, Zhu, and the others surrounded them, so he asked, Mingzhu, do you recognize us? Wan Mingzhu shook her head. Confusion appeared in her eyes again. No, you're not my senior martial brother, you're Grandmaster. She then smiled and pulled Shi's sleeve. Grandmaster, I want an inferno beast. Senior Marshal Brother said he'd give me an inferno beast. Chapter 249. Wan Mingzhu didn't wake up in the end. With a heavy heart, she left Zhili House and went to the main hall to look for Lord Daoist Jinghe. Lord Daoist Jinghe was sitting cross-legged on his dragon chair, flipping through stacks of books and jade slips. When he saw Shi coming out, he only looked up. You're so fast today. Shi didn't answer. He sat not far from him, picked up a few books, and flipped through them. He asked, Master, what else are you looking for? Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't look up. He just rummaged and said, I'm looking for a way to save Mingzhu. After a while, seeing that she didn't answer and just sat there with a distracted look, he couldn't help but say, you should also think of a way. You can't just ignore her. Shi regained his composure and said, Master, I have a suggestion. Why don't we give Mingzhu to Senior Marshal Brother Xianin? Lord Daoist Jinghe looked up at him and raised his eyebrows. She said slowly, Mingzhu's state of mind has collapsed. I think it's all because she relies on us too much. If we give her to Senior Marshal Brother Xianin, who has a lot of disciples, maybe she can experience a different life. Lord Daoist Jinghe stroked his beard and pondered for a long time. He said, what you said isn't unreasonable. She continued, Master always takes Mingzhu with him, so her status is far more honorable than ordinary disciples. This allows her to obtain more things than ordinary disciples, but it also makes her lose the opportunity to learn from cultivators in the same realm as her. Right now, Senior Martial Brother Xuaning's disciples are still in the foundation building realm, so it's the same for Mingzhu. Maybe she can learn something from them. But Lord Daoist Jinghe was a bit hesitant. The disciple Mingzhu injured was Xuaning's disciple. Will they be dissatisfied? They'll certainly be dissatisfied, Qin said, but Senior Martial Brother Xianyin has always been fair, and Qingyu and Fengxue have good temperaments. As for Wei Jiaxi, she's also not a bad person. If Master personally told them, they won't make things difficult for Mingzhu even if they're dissatisfied. After a short pause, Qin added, besides, it's also good to let Mingzhu experience the cold treatment of ordinary disciples. Now that she's forgotten everything, if she can start anew like an ordinary disciple, perhaps she won't develop the temperament she had back then. When Lord Daoist Jinghe heard what Qin said, he lowered his head and pondered. He was initially thinking about how to let Mingzhu regain her consciousness, but from the looks of it, it seemed like he could nurture her personality again. What you said is quite right. Lord Daoist Jinghe pondered. If she regains her consciousness, Mingzhu's collapsed state of mind won't be able to be restored to its original state. It'd be better for her to start all over again. That's exactly what I was thinking. Qin paused for a moment, then brought up another matter. Master, there's something very strange. I don't know if you know the reason. What? I discovered that when I heal Tinga, my spiritual aura actually doesn't decrease. Instead, it increases. Upon hearing what he said, the absent-minded Lord Daoist Jinghe regained his train of thought. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. Really? Yes. Qin nodded. It's always been like this these past few days. I've tried so many times, but there's never been an exception. This was obviously against common sense. Lord Daoist Jinghe stretched out his hand. Let me see. Qin extended his right hand. Lord Daoist Jinghe felt Qin pulse and poured his spiritual aura into Qin body. After a while, a frown appeared on his face. Seeing his expression, Qin couldn't help but ask, Master, is there something wrong? After a long time, Lord Daoist Jinghe finally let go of Qin hand and shook his head. Haven't you noticed that there's a small circulation in your body? Qin was stunned. He raised his hand to move his spiritual aura. Warm yang spiritual aura ran through his meridians, reached his dantian, and flowed out of his dantian. No, there was a strand of extremely pure yin spiritual aura in his yang spiritual aura. It mixed with the neutralizing aura stored in the depths of his dantian and circulated in a corner of his dantian. This strand of yin spiritual aura was different from the yin spiritual aura he had before he started cultivating the pure yang technique. At that time, his yin spiritual aura was also impure. It mixed with his yang spiritual aura and was difficult to distinguish. However, this strand of yin spiritual aura was extremely pure without any impurities. It mixed with his yang spiritual aura and neutralizing aura, but they were also clearly separated and circulated with each other. After a while, he stopped cultivating and said, I couldn't find the extreme yin aura, so I suppressed the neutralizing aura in the depths of my dantian. I didn't expect there would be such a change. Master? Lord Daoist Jinghe was an experienced and knowledgeable middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. In just a short while, he already had an idea. He stroked his short beard and said slowly, Do you remember the characteristics of Tinga's art of the origin? Qin was stunned. He said, The art of the origin is cultivated by people with balanced spiritual roots of the 5 elements. Its concept is the primordial chaos. The 5 elements reinforce and counteract each other, and yin and yang circulate back and forth, reaching an endless state. Correct. Mo Tinga naturally couldn't hide this part of the cultivation technique from Lord Daoist Jinghe, so both of them knew what kind of cultivation technique the art of the origin was. Lord Daoist Jinghe stroked his beard and said, The 5 elements circulation of yin spiritual aura is inside Tinga's body. This kind of cultivation technique is originally completely different from the one you cultivate. Your two spiritual roots of metal and fire are excellent, and you've been cultivating fire techniques since you were young. In addition, you refined the yang spiritual bead, so the yang aura inside your body is extremely abundant. What you seek is purity. Unfortunately, you cultivate the art of 3 primordial cycles. It's not a big deal if the 2 auras of extreme yang and neutralizing yang are together, but with the addition of extreme yin aura, it's also a kind of circulation. Qin Shi frowned. After thinking for a long time, he said, Master, what you want to say is that my art of 3 primordial cycles is actually similar to the art of the origin? Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded. That's my guess. It's just that hers is the circulation of the 5 elements, but yours is the circulation of yin and yang. After you turned into a pure yang body, the neutralizing aura was suppressed in the depths of your dantian. You also didn't obtain extreme yin aura, so the art of 3 primordial cycles almost lost its effectiveness. These days, when you treated Tiange's injuries, you obtained pure yin spiritual aura from her, so your art of 3 primordial cycles started to really operate. Qin Shi lowered his head and thought for a while, but he was shocked. Master. According to what you said, this art of 3 primordial cycles can form a small primal chaos inside my body, and from then on, spiritual aura will grow and multiply endlessly. Lord Daoist Jinghe shook his head. This is only Master's guess. I can't answer you right now. If you want to know, you can only verify it yourself. Qin Shi didn't say anything for a long time. His expression was very solemn. If what his master said was true, it would be a huge change for his cultivation life. If the art of 3 primordial cycles could be used like this, then he'd always been on the wrong path in cultivating this cultivation technique. He originally thought whether it was his spiritual aura or his constitution, what he pursued was purity. As it turned out, above purity, there was also balance and circulation. As Lord Daoist Jinghe thought about it, he suddenly laughed. I really didn't expect this. If that's the case, you and Tiange are really a match made in heaven. I've seen her cultivation technique. The so-called art of the origin is originally the cycle of the 5 elements and the alternation of yin and yang to form the primal chaos inside the body. However, she has a pure yin constitution, so she can only cultivate the balance of the 5 elements of yin spiritual aura. As for you, the art of 3 primordial cycles only lacks the Tai Yin Qi. Without the Tai Yin Qi, you have never been able to cultivate this cultivation technique. Moreover, you have been transformed into a pure yang body, unable to cultivate the Tai Yin Qi. If the 2 of you perform dual cultivation, Tiange can obtain the pure yang aura from you. At that time, she'll be able to cultivate the real art of the origin, and after your art of 3 primordial cycles obtains her extreme yin aura, you'll be able to form the state of 3 primordial cycles. Ha 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 ha, this is more suitable than performing dual cultivation with pure yang and pure yin constitutions. Lord Daoist Jinghe saw that Qin Shi looked unhappy, so he asked, what's wrong? Is this not good? After a long time, Qin Shi shook his head. I don't want to have anything to do with cultivation. If it was just for cultivation, why would he wait until now? Master had long said that the most convenient way for him to obtain the extreme yin aura was to perform dual cultivation with her, but he had always been unwilling to do so because he didn't want dual cultivation to be too utilitarian. Hey! Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned and looked at him disapprovingly. Aren't you thinking too much? Why must we avoid the benefits of dual cultivation? Isn't it good to do things that are beneficial to both of us? Qin Shi lowered his head and didn't speak for a long time. Lord Daoist Jinghe couldn't help but say, hey, why aren't you speaking? I really don't understand. Other people can't wait for more benefits from dual cultivation, but you're so unwilling. Qin Shi said hesitantly, if that's the case, I always feel like I'm using her. What use? Lord Daoist Jinghe shouted, child, what's wrong with your brain? This is a side benefit, do you understand? Do you deny the feelings between you because of the benefits of dual cultivation? Qin Shi showed a bitter smile. Master, do you think she has feelings for me? This question made Lord Daoist Jinghe hesitate for a long time. Well, she probably does. I really don't believe she doesn't. But I also don't believe she does. Qin Shi lowered his head and smiled self-mockingly. When I brought her back from East Kunwu, I saw that she was moved on the way, but I deliberately avoided her. She's also a smart person. She didn't take advantage of the opportunity to get close to me when we were alone. Instead, she controlled herself and kept her distance. It was precisely because of this that I thought highly of her. Now that 30 or 40 years have passed, how many chances do we have to see each other? Even if she was moved at that time, I'm afraid she's already forgotten about it, right? But it's not like she doesn't care about you. Besides, Qin Shi interrupted him and continued, how can I explain my identity? Until now, I've never told her that Qin Shi is Qin Shoujing. She has a good impression of Qin Shi. First, when her second uncle passed away, I accompanied her for 2 months and saved her from a difficult situation. Second, she thinks I'm a cultivator in the same realm as her and we're equals. Master, you also know how strong her self-esteem is. If she knows the truth, will she be willing to take another step closer to me? Seeing that Lord Daoist Jinghe was also speechless, Qin Shi could only show a bitter smile. Fine, let's take a step back and think about it. She still has feelings for me, but are these feelings enough for her to forgive my deceit? Although I've never wronged her, I can't calmly explain this matter. He sighed and said, feelings that might not necessarily still exist, concealing my identity, and the benefits of dual cultivation I just mentioned. With so many things piled together, I really can't predict how she'll react. Chapter 250. Mo Tinga felt like she was dreaming, but she also felt like everything was real. In this dream, she was a small ball of white light roaming in the boundless sea of clouds. She felt very happy, because in this sea of clouds, she was free and unrestrained. But not long after, she became very depressed, because she could not swim through this sea of clouds. In the beginning, her whiteness was thin and carried a kind of transparent coldness. Before long, however, a warm current often entered her body, giving her whiteness a warm layer of red. This warmth brought about many changes to her. She found that she became stronger and the speed at which she roamed in the sea of clouds became faster and faster. Later, she found that the sea of clouds also became very strange. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, rain scattered, and clouds gathered. But not long after, this warmth disappeared, and the previous warmth also dispersed bit by bit. She fell into a real dream. Tienga, quickly call your father to come back for dinner. Oh, okay. The little girl who was doing her homework on the table jumped up and shouted, Mother, I want to eat fish balls. Is there any today? Yes, of course there is. A smiling voice said, There's anything you want to eat. Quickly call your father to come back for dinner. Father, father. All her regrets started when she lost her father. Therefore, in the depths of her heart, she always fantasized over and over again about what would have happened if her father was here. Would she have had a perfect life? Although she vaguely knew this, she didn't expect it to be so serious. Even though she was now an advanced inner disciple of a nascent soul cultivator, had great talents, and possessed many things that others didn't, she still couldn't make up for the regrets in her heart. In the 10,000 laws of nature formation, when she used the 5 hindrances overturning senses, she finally understood what kind of weakness her mental state had. It wasn't that her heart wasn't strong, her willpower wasn't strong, and her Tao heart wasn't firm, but the regrets of her childhood had always been buried in the depths of her heart. In fact, if she had a father, would her life really be perfect? Her father was a core formation cultivator and a famous cultivator in West Kunwu, but her mother was a mortal. Even if her father really loved her mother back then, it couldn't have been a perfect and happy family. How could a mortal marry a core formation cultivator and live a happy life? When they were in the secular world, they were indeed a loving husband and wife, but when they went to Kunwu, they certainly wouldn't be happy. Mother would be looked down upon, no matter how well father treated her. And because her mother was a mortal, she would also be looked down upon. Furthermore, as a mortal, his mother only had a lifespan of 100 years, a short dozen years of youth. As a core formation cultivator, his father could live for 500 to 600 years, or even 700 to 800 years. Furthermore, she possessed the purine constitution, but had no spiritual roots. Her mother was destined to live for only a little more than 20 years. Even if she had a father, she would lose her mother. Even if she hadn't wandered around for more than 10 years, she wouldn't have been able to avoid all the suffering. In the dream, Mo Tiange saw herself obtaining her father but losing her mother. She finally understood this truth. In one's life, one may be able to avoid many misfortunes, but it is impossible to make up for all regrets. On the path of seeking immortality, one must understand this principle. Rejoice when you gain, and don't mourn when you lose, because you will always lose something. It's better to rejoice in every possession. She opened her eyes and woke from the long dream. She was at peace. Auntie? Yi Zhenji's voice was filled with disbelief and joy. Auntie, you're finally awake. Seeing his excited appearance, Mo Tiange raised the corner of her mouth and chuckled softly. You. She hadn't spoken for a long time, so her voice was hoarse. Oh, Auntie, drink some water. Yi Zhenji hastily poured some tea and helped her up. Mo Tiange drank the water in one gulp, then said with a smile, "It's not like I can't move, you don't have to do this." In fact, her body was full of spiritual aura now, so she was very energetic. Yi Zhenji didn't care and continued to ask, "Auntie, how are you now? Are you all right?" "Wait, I'll go call Grandmaster." As he spoke, he rushed out of the room. Mo Tiange couldn't stop him no matter how hard she tried. Mo Tiange had no choice but to shake her head and climb out of bed. She remembered what happened before she fainted, but she didn't know how long she had been unconscious. 3 days? 5 days? However, this matter was a blessing in disguise. If it weren't for this, she might have unconsciously entered closed-door meditation to form her gold core, and problems would have arisen. Even though a foundation-building cultivator's body didn't have any impurities and wouldn't produce filth, sleeping for such a long time still felt very uncomfortable. Mo Tiange went to wash her face and saw Yi Zhenji hurriedly coming in with Lord Daoist Jinghe. "Master." Lord Daoist Jinghe looked solemn. He nodded, then pulled her wrist to examine her meridians. After a while, Lord Daoist Jinghe let go of her and said with a gentle expression, "You're all right in the end." Mo Tiange was confused. "Master, what are you doing? What could possibly happen to me?" Since she wasn't injured by Yuan Mingzhu, her divine comprehension must have just been attacked. There was no need to be so nervous, right? Upon hearing what she said, Lord Daoist Jinghe pointed at her and said, "Girl, you're really reckless. What could possibly happen to you? If you woke up a bit later, something would have definitely happened." Huh? Mo Tiange became even more confused. Yi Zhenji said, "Auntie, do you know how long you've been unconscious? Has it been a long time?" "It's been 3 years." Yi Zhenji couldn't help but shout, "Auntie, you've been unconscious for 3 years." Mo Tiange was stunned. That long? For her, it was nothing but a dream, but 3 years had actually passed by. Lord Daoist Jinghe said, "All right, I see you're very well. If you have any questions, ask Zhenji." He then waved his sleeves and left. Mo Tiange felt something was wrong. With Lord Daoist Jinghe's temperament, there was no reason for him to be so calm, right? She thought about it, then asked Yi Zhenji, "What's going on with your grandmaster? Why does he seem unhappy?" Yi Zhenji said, "Maybe it's because master hasn't returned yet." Mo Tiange was stunned. "Your master hasn't returned? What happened in the past 3 years?" Auntie, after your accident, master came out of closed-door meditation. Grandmaster said Auntie closed your sea of knowledge and won't wake up for a while. In order to concoct medicinal pills for you and help you wake up, master went out to look for medicine. After a while, Yizhenji still didn't see any reaction from Mo Tiange, so he couldn't help but call out, "Auntie?" Huh? Mo Tiange woke up with a start. Yizhenji was full of questions. "What's wrong with you?" "It's nothing." She suppressed her chaotic mood and showed a smile. "Jinji, what happened in the past 3 years? Take your time and tell me." "Oh, okay." She only remembered Wan Mingzhu fell into a demonic barrier and wanted to hurt her. When she was under the 5 confusions plaguing spirit, she only had a bit of spiritual aura left to block Wan Mingzhu. When the two of them were in a deadlock, they somehow triggered the formation. Mo Tiange didn't remember what happened after that. Now that she heard from Yizhenji, she realized it was because her divine comprehension was overstimulated and she closed her divine sense. When Yizhenji said Qin, she brought her back to heal her injuries. Mo Tiange frowned. "How did your master know I was injured?" Yizhenji cautiously looked at her, then said, "Master, sensed an omen." Mo Tiange stared ahead and didn't say anything for a long time. "Auntie?" Yizhenji looked at her expression and couldn't figure out what she was thinking. Mo Tiange regained her composure and forced a smile. "What's wrong?" "Auntie, what are you thinking about?" "Nothing." Her expression was flat. "What else?" "Continue." Yizhenji continued to speak slowly. "Grandmaster said you closed your sea of knowledge on your own. You weren't injured, but you didn't know when you'd wake up. Master said you'd be fine if you were in a coma for a short time, but if you were in a coma for a long time, your body might wither, so Grandmaster had to think of a way. Later, Grandmaster took out a set of techniques and let Master practice it. Every day, he used spiritual aura to refine Auntie's body. A few days later, Grandmaster found several pill recipes and said they could help Auntie wake up faster. However, many of the spiritual plants on these pill recipes were very rare, so Master left the mountain to look for them soon. "What about now?" Yizhenji glanced at Mo Tiange. Seeing her calm expression, he was puzzled, but he didn't have the courage to ask, so he continued to speak. Once Master left the mountain, he didn't come back. He only occasionally sent letters and sent back medicinal pills he refined. Grandmaster personally refined Auntie's body. No wonder after 3 years, not only was there nothing wrong with her body, but her spiritual aura was also a lot more abundant. It turned out there was such a reason. "Why didn't your master come back?" "Master hasn't been able to find the materials for the most important pill recipes, so he hasn't come back." Yizhenji hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he held back his words. He was a bit angry. Although he'd long stopped being angry with Master, he was still reluctant to speak up for him. "In other words, your master hasn't formed his nascent soul all these years?" Yizhenji shook his head. Master originally planned to enter closed-door meditation, but who knew something would happen to Auntie? "Auntie, what's wrong?" Mo Tiange felt very uncomfortable, so she changed the subject. "What about Wan Mingzhu? How is she?" "Senior Marshal Sister Wan." Yizhenji said, "She's fine, but she seems to have been too stimulated in the formation and forgot a lot of things." "Really?" Mo Tiange said faintly. She didn't like or hate Wan Mingzhu. She didn't like Wan Mingzhu's character. As for what happened in the formation, Wan Mingzhu couldn't be blamed entirely. She was also unlucky to actually run into Wan Mingzhu, who had entered a demonic barrier, at that time. Now Grandmaster sent Senior Marshal Sister Wan to Sweet Dew Peak. Grandmaster said if Senior Marshal Sister Wan stayed with Grandmaster Xuanin's disciples, she might feel better. After he finished speaking, Yizhenji noticed that her expression was still calm, so he couldn't help but ask, "Auntie, don't you have any thoughts?" "Thoughts? What thoughts?" Mo Tiange remained calm as she stood up to pour tea. Yizhenji also couldn't say it, but he felt that her reaction shouldn't be like this. How should he put it? If Auntie really had something towards Master, she shouldn't be this calm, right? If there was nothing, shouldn't she be surprised by Master's attitude? Yizhenji looked up and was about to say something, but he suddenly noticed that the table was full of tea. Auntie. The water poured out. Oh. Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. She forced a smile, then took a handkerchief to wipe her hands. Yizhenji realized something, but he didn't want to ask, so he just said, Auntie, you rest first. I'll go send a message to Master. Chapter 251. After Yizhenji left, Mo Tiange stared blankly at the tea that flowed all over the floor, speechless for a long time. For a moment, she felt her mind was a mess. She couldn't tell what she was thinking about. After a long time, she waved her sleeve and cast a small spell, making the water stain slowly disappear. 3 years. She was actually in a coma for 3 years. If her body hadn't been tempered for a long time, as Zhenji said, she really wouldn't believe she'd actually been in a coma for 3 years. 3 years was like a dream. She understood the principle of being happy when you gain something, but not sad when you lose something. She didn't expect that what awaited her was actually this kind of news. When she woke up, her heart was calm and happy. Now that she saw through the flaw in her mental state, she was ready to enter closed-door meditation to form her gold core. Unexpectedly, Zhenji said this to her. She didn't know what she should or could think about. In the end, she simply didn't think about anything. She returned to her cultivation room, entered the virtual sky world, and continued to meditate. Spiritual aura flowed through her meridians and converged into her dantian. What made Mo Tiange feel strange was that there was a trace of strange warm spiritual aura in the depths of her dantian. Indeed, this trace of spiritual aura was warm and bright, but because her spiritual aura was originally cold, it became warm. She tried to control this strange spiritual aura, only to discover that this spiritual aura was uncontrollably entangled with her spiritual aura, slowly mixing into a ball. She wanted to stop, but she couldn't control it. Finally, this spiritual aura and spiritual aura completely converged, forming a cycle, alternating endlessly. Time is constant, space is balance. Heaven and earth are divided into yin and yang, containing the 5 elements. Metal with extreme yin is sharp, which is urge. Metal with extreme yang is thunder, which is lead. Wood with extreme yin produces essence, which is spirit. Wood with extreme yang drives away evil, which is break. Wood with extreme yin produces essence, which is spirit. Wood with extreme yang drives away evil, which is break. Fire with extreme yin gathers souls, which is hell. Fire with extreme yang is immortal, which is nirvana. Earth with extreme yin is immortal, which is secluded. Earth with extreme yang is firm, which is unbreakable. The Taiyuan record's incantation involuntarily appeared in her heart. The 5 elements of spiritual energy in her body and that strange spiritual energy formed a spiritual ball, one bright and one dark, just like a Tai Chi diagram. The 5 elements were interlinked, bright and dark alternating, opposing each other but also blending with each other. There was me in you, and you in me. The gold chi was driven and guided, the wood chi was spiritually broken, and the water chi was strange and illusory. Every kind of spirit chi had 2 forms. Mo Tiange was startled and slowly opened her eyes. She understood that light and darkness were yin and yang. That small ball of spiritual energy contained both yin and yang, reaching the true realm of origin. The thing that brought about this change was the spiritual aura that made her feel warm. Obviously, this was the yang spiritual aura. Ever since she started cultivating, due to her pure yin constitution, when she absorbed spiritual energy, yang spiritual energy was automatically expelled from her body. Only yin spiritual energy could enter her body. Even if other people poured their spiritual aura into her meridians, the yang spiritual aura in the mixed spiritual aura would also be quickly expelled. Because of that, for a long time, she didn't know what it felt like to have yang spiritual aura inside her body. This yang spiritual aura was obviously not ordinary yang spiritual aura. It condensed and didn't disperse, it gathered and took shape. It was pure and without a trace of impurities. Although it was only a trace, it was extremely stable and firm. It took root in her body and mixed with her own spiritual aura, unable to be separated. Where did it come from? Mo Tiange frowned and pondered carefully. Jinji said when she was unconscious, there were two people who tempered her body. Could it be? With that thought in mind, she flung her sleeves, left the virtual sky world, and went straight to the main hall of Shangqing Palace. Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe was sitting on his dragon throne. He wasn't meditating or studying any spells, nor was he joking with the maids. Instead, he was drinking wine alone with a frown on his face. Mo Tiange originally wanted to ask him something, but judging from his appearance, she couldn't get anything out of him, so she slowly approached him and called out, "Master?" Lord Daoist Jinghe finished a cup of wine and glanced at her with drunken eyes. Why didn't you properly adjust your breath? Has your body adapted to the current situation? I do have some things I want to ask Master. Mo Tiange paused for a moment then asked, "Master, what's wrong with you?" Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned and shook his head. Let's talk about your situation first. I didn't see any abnormalities in the spiritual aura inside your body. How do you feel? Is there any problem? The problem is no, Mo Tiange said. It's just that I found a massive spiritual aura inside my dantian, and this massive spiritual aura is very strange. Oh. Lord Daoist Jinghe raised his eyebrows. Strange in what way? Mo Tiange pondered then said, Master, you know, although I have the spiritual roots of the origin, I have a pure yin constitution. There's only yin in my body, but no yang, so I can only cultivate the small origin with yin's spiritual aura, but I can't cultivate the primal chaos with the balance of yin and yang and the cycle of the 5 elements. But now, I found a massive spiritual aura inside my body. This massive spiritual aura blended perfectly with my yin spiritual aura, forming an alternating situation. I observed it for a while and found that after it blended with that massive spiritual aura, it had 2 forms of the 5 elements, so I deduced that it should be Yang's spiritual aura. Lord Daoist Jinghe's eyes flashed when he heard that. After you blended with that massive spiritual aura, were there any abnormalities? No, Mo Tiange said, I pondered it for a long time and found that this is the real primal chaos. If I want to cultivate the art of the origin to the extreme, this will be the realm I'll reach. Upon seeing the faint smile on Lord Daoist Jinghe's face, Mo Tiange was bewildered. Master, where did this massive yang spiritual aura inside my body come from? Jinji said that when I was unconscious, Yu An, and senior martial brother Shoujing tempered my body. Could it be that you? Lord Daoist Jinghe poured a cup of wine and smiled, but he didn't answer. Mo Tiange waited for a while and couldn't help but ask again, Master? Lord Daoist Jinghe drank the cup of wine and said, Tiange, Master wants to tell you something. You have to be mentally prepared. Mo Tiange frowned. Master. What's so important that he's so cautious? Don't worry. It's not a bad thing. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's expression, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled very amiably. He personally pulled her to sit across from him and even poured a cup of wine for her. Master, Lord Daoist Jinghe began to say, the yang spiritual aura inside your body indeed came from us. You know Master's aptitude. I have a single fire spiritual root, which can be considered excellent. Unfortunately, my luck wasn't on my side, so I couldn't be considered a genius whether I formed my gold core or my nascent soul. Mo Tiange stared at him without saying anything. She knew this wasn't the main point. Lord Daoist Jinghe acted as if he didn't know how nervous she was. He continued to say slowly, presumably, you also understand that a constitution with a mixture of yin and yang has a mixture of yin and yang spiritual aura. In that case, once spiritual aura entered your body, it would quickly disperse. Only pure yang spiritual aura could be so pure and stay in your body for such a long time. Therefore, the yang spiritual aura inside your body should have come from someone with a pure yang constitution or someone close to a pure yang constitution. Upon seeing the slight change in Mo Tiange's expression, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. Of course it wasn't me. If I had a pure yang constitution and a single spiritual root, how could I have wasted all these years? Mo Tiange was silent for a long time. The expression on her face kept changing. After a long time, she finally said, "Master, don't tease me. Tell me everything at once." Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. "You don't have to be like this. You've been under my tutelage for all these years. You should know very well how I've treated you." In that split second, Mo Tiange indeed became suspicious. Upon hearing what Lord Daoist Jinghe said, she suppressed her suspicions and said as calmly as possible, "I know." "Master, continue." She already knew where the pure yang spiritual aura came from. There was actually such a coincidence in this world? She already met Tang Shen. How could there possibly be another person with a pure yang constitution? Lord Daoist Jinghe shook the wine cup in his hand and said bluntly, "In fact, your senior martial brother doesn't have a pure yang constitution." Mo Tiange was stunned. She cried out involuntarily, "How's that possible? If he didn't have a pure yang constitution, how could he have pure yang spiritual aura?" Mo Tiange's mind raced as she asked, "Could it be that he has some kind of cultivation technique?" "You're half right." Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded, then asked, "Do you know there's a spiritual object in this world called Yang spiritual bead?" Yang spiritual bead? Mo Tiange frowned and pondered. She then said slowly, "I seem to have read about it in some ancient book, but it wasn't very detailed. I don't know the specifics. To be exact, Yang spiritual beads aren't the only things that exist in this world. Yin spiritual beads also exist. When heaven and earth were first separated, yin and yang auras blended together, giving rise to countless spirit veins. However, there was a kind of strange object born in spirit veins that specialized in swallowing either the yang spiritual aura or yin spiritual aura in spirit veins. Over time, that strange object swallowed all the yang spiritual aura and yin spiritual aura in the spirit veins, giving rise to yang spiritual beads or yin spiritual beads. From ancient times until now, yin and yang spiritual beads rarely appeared in the world, so there are very few ancient records about them. But coincidentally, your senior martial brother Shoujing happened to obtain a yang spiritual bead 100 years ago. Mo Tiange's expression changed. She already understood what had happened. Lord Daoist Jinghe continued to say, "When he obtained this bead, I originally thought the yang spiritual aura inside his body would be extremely vigorous, and it just so happened that he cultivated a fire element cultivation technique. In that case, the two of them would bring out the best in each other. But the changes that happened later were because of you." "Because of me?" "Correct." Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. "In the end, let him tell you himself. Some things aren't suitable for Master to say." The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth twitched. In the end, she couldn't help but say, "Master, when I worshipped you, I didn't." Halfway through her words, Lord Daoist Jinghe already understood what she meant. After denying her question, he said with a smile, "Although it wasn't Master's initiative to accept you, I didn't have any ulterior motives. You're Master's last disciple now, so no matter what I do, I won't force you to do anything. As for how you'll walk your own path in the future, it's up to you." At this point, Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled again and patted her shoulder softly. "Don't let your imagination run wild. It's time for you to form your gold core. If you put your mind on other things, you'll inevitably have a flaw in your mental state, and that wouldn't be a good thing." Mo Tiange nodded, trying her best to calm down. Although she was naturally suspicious, she trusted her own judgment more. She worshipped Master as her Master's disciple for nearly 40 years. She saw and felt how Master treated her with her own eyes. If Master had any bad intentions, why would he treat her like that all these years? However, when she suddenly heard this news, she couldn't help but be shocked. What kind of situation was this? And these 3 years? What were they? Chapter 252. The sky above Clear Spring Peak was cloudless, and the spiritual aura was faintly discernible. Mo Tiange closed her eyes and stood in the air with her palms facing each other. A thin spiritual aura circulated back and forth between her palms. This spiritual aura was thin at first, but it gradually thickened and finally gathered into a very strong orange color. Mo Tiange frowned deeply as if she was enduring something. Before long, this spiritual aura suddenly soared and completely enveloped her body, forming a spiritual aura shield. Mo Tiange opened her eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. After obtaining this yang spiritual aura, the real origin finally appeared in her body. Unfortunately, this spiritual aura was really rare, so she could only use some small spells. This was a small spell recorded in Taiyuan record called Art of the Origin. This spell used spiritual aura to defend oneself. It consumed very little spiritual aura, but its defensive ability was very good. If one was proficient in using it, they could absorb a lot of attacks during fights of magical power. When cultivators in the Foundation building realm and above fought, their magic tools often carried spiritual aura attacks, so they would use spiritual aura shields during fights of magical power. This Art of the Origin was also a kind of spiritual aura shield, but it consumed much less spiritual aura than ordinary ones. While she was practicing it over and over again, Mo Tiange's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She instinctively looked into the distance. Qin Shi felt the spiritual aura in his body surging, and he couldn't control it at all. Suddenly, his meridians were seriously injured, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. In the air, a humanoid figure wrapped in black aura descended and sneered. Qin Shojing, how do you feel? It doesn't feel good to be surrounded by devil aura, does it? Qin Shi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and stood up unsteadily. Although his face was pale, his eyes were calm. It's just a so-so. Standing several feet away from him, the person heard his words and laughed. You're indeed Qin Jinghe's disciple. You're tough. Even so, he waved his hand, and the black aura once again wrapped around Qin Shi. Qin Shi had nowhere to retreat and was about to be wrapped up, but suddenly, a flame shot out of his hands and forced the black aura back a bit. Huh? The person was greatly surprised. You can actually force back my primordial devil aura? Qin Shi smiled. A long sword flickering with flames suddenly appeared in his hand. It had an amazing momentum and a threatening spiritual aura. With this sword in hand, even though he was heavily injured, he still had some power. 3 Yang Real Fire Sword. This is the 3 Yang Real Fire Sword? The man muttered to himself with interest. You're quite interesting, Junior. You can be considered a rare treasure to be able to repel my primordial devil chi. Unfortunately, you're destined to die by my hands today. Hee, this old man loves talented people. You can also be considered a character, so I'll let you try and see whether your 3 Yang Real Fire Sword can harm this old man. Qin Shi didn't say anything. The flame on the sword in his hand became even brighter. It floated in the air and hovered in front of him. As he stared at the sword, a hint of killing intent flashed in his eyes. He raised his head and looked at the monster covered in black gas. Seeing the look in his eyes, this person became even more excited. He was waiting for this interesting junior to make his last stand. The 3 Yang Real Fire Sword slowly floated up, and the flames became more intense. Qin Shi closed his eyes and gathered his aura. He was just about to make his move. All of a sudden, he changed his hand seal. The 3 Yang Real Fire Sword turned into a raging flame and shot towards this person. In the blink of an eye, Qin Shi turned into a flight light and flew in the opposite direction. This person raised his hand and waved. The flame in front of him was instantly extinguished. How could it be as powerful as it was just now? When he saw the fleeing flight light, his expression suddenly changed. Qin Shojing. Junior, you're really cunning and treacherous. This brat didn't want to fight him at all. He just let him think so, but in the end, he took advantage of his carelessness and instantly escaped. However, although this person stomped his feet in anger, he didn't take it to heart. This Qin Shoujing was, after all, a core formation cultivator. No matter how cunning he was, the gap between their strengths was too big, so there was no need to worry. Therefore, after he used his divine sense to lock on Qin Shoujing, he leisurely turned into a black cloud and chased in the direction Qin Shoujing escaped. But the more he chased, the more he felt something was wrong. Qin Shoujing almost escaped to the edge of his divine sense range and almost lost his target several times. How could this kind of speed be a core formation cultivator's escaping technique? He couldn't figure it out no matter how he thought about it, but he was even more annoyed in his heart. He immediately launched his escaping technique with all his strength and chased after Qin Shoujing. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment. Several rays of light appeared in the sky above Mount Taikang. The yellow one was Lord Daoist Jinyang, the red one was Lord Daoist Jinghe, the blue one was Lord Daoist Miaoyi, and the cyan one was Lord Daoist Xianin. The four nascent soul Lord Daoists instantly flew into the sky and looked into the distance. Lord Daoist Jinyang's expression changed first. Not good. It's that old man Song Feng. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression turned livid. He actually dared to attack my Mount Taikang. Lord Daoist Jinyang frowned and immediately said, "Junior Martial Brother Jinghe, come with me." Junior Martial Sister Miaoyi, Junior Martial Brother Xianin, you two stay here and support us. Miaoyi and Xianin only answered yes. Then the two nascent soul Lord Daoists with the highest cultivation levels in Xianqing school instantly flew away. In the distance, Mo Tiange was lost in thought. What happened in the end? Why did Master and the other martial uncles look so serious? Just as she was hesitating whether she should go forward or not, Lord Daoist Miaoyi waved at her. Mo Tiange was delighted and hastily flew forward. Martial Uncle Miaoyi, Martial Uncle Xianin. Miaoyi asked with a kind expression, "Tiange, why are you staying here?" Mo Tiange and Lord Daoist Xianin were originally from the same sect, so she didn't need to be afraid of anything. Although Lord Daoist Miaoyi didn't have many dealings with Clear Spring Peak, she had always been kind to juniors like them. Now that she heard Miaoyi's question, Mo Tiange said bluntly, "Martial Uncle Miaoyi, my heart is beating very fast. Did something big happen?" Miaoyi was a bit surprised to hear that, but she quickly replied, "Something big indeed happened, but your master and Martial Uncle Jinyang are here, so you don't need to worry. You should go back to avoid being affected." With four nascent soul cultivators here, she indeed had no right to intervene. Mo Tiange had no choice but to agree. Yes. After she left, Miaoyi glanced at Xianin and said, "Junior Martial Brother Xianin, your junior martial sister's senses are really sharp." Xianin, who was spreading his divine sense with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He didn't answer but said, "Why would that devil Song Feng chase us to Mount Taikang? Xianqing School is one of the best cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, but he's really bold." Miaoyi chuckled. "Didn't he come to make trouble during your soul formation ceremony? That old man Song Feng relies on his strength in fights of magical powers. I'm afraid he even dares to charge into Tiandao sect." Xianin shook his head and sighed. "I wonder if Master and Senior Martial Brother Jinyang can save Junior Martial Brother Shoujing in time. It depends on his luck." Miaoyi didn't say anything else after she said that. The two of them spread their divine senses to observe the situation in the distance. None of the Xianqing school cultivators under the nascent soul realm knew what was happening, but the two of them were very clear about the life and death situation not far away. How could a core formation cultivator escape unscathed from a great late-stage nascent soul cultivator? They knew in their hearts that if they were careless, or if Lord Daoist Jinyang and Lord Daoist Jinghe weren't careful, Qin Shoujing's life would be forfeit. After a while, Lord Daoist Miaoyi's face lit up. "Junior Martial Brother Xianin, let's go help them." Xianin responded. The two of them also turned into a flight light and disappeared in the sky above Mount Taikang. Mo Tiange stood in front of Shangqing Palace, silently looking at the empty sky. She felt agitated, but she couldn't tell why. Before long, several figures finally appeared in the sky. Jinyang and Miaoyi left midway, while Lord Daoist Xianin supported another person and followed Lord Daoist Jinghe to Clear Spring Peak. Mo Tiange stared at them closely. Her eyes widened when she saw the person leaning on Lord Daoist Xuanin's body in a sorry state. Tiange. Lord Daoist Jinghe was a bit surprised to see her, but he immediately said, "It's too late. Let's go." Lord Daoist Xianin followed him into Shangqing Palace while supporting the unconscious Qin Shi. Mo Tiange also followed them. As soon as Lord Daoist Xianin put Qin Shi down, Lord Daoist Jinghe immediately fed him several medicinal pills, then used his spiritual aura to heal his injuries. Just by looking at Qin Shi's injuries, it was obvious how serious they were. His robe was stained with several bloodstains, his face was pale, his eyes were closed, and the spiritual aura in his body was weak and unstable. So her uneasiness just now was actually because he was injured? Who could injure him like this and even alarm 4 nascent soul cultivators from her school? Her mind was a mess, and she couldn't think of a reason. Lord Daoist Xianin noticed it and said in a low voice, "Tiange, if you're anxious, you might as well wait outside. Don't disturb Master." Mo Tiange was about to say something, but she heard Lord Daoist Jinghe suddenly say, "No, Tiange, come here." Mo Tiange was stunned and approached him. "Master?" Lord Daoist Jinghe pointed at Qin Shi and said, "Right now, the spiritual aura in his body is chaotic, and his meridians and dantian are both heavily injured. Although I used medicinal pills and spiritual aura to suppress his injuries, it's very difficult to smooth his spiritual aura. His meridians and dantian are too seriously injured. If I use too much force, his injuries will worsen. Only your Yin's spiritual aura is attracted to it, and it's gentle, so I can give it a try." Mo Tiange was puzzled. "Master, don't delay." With a solemn expression, Lord Daoist Jinghe shouted, "Quick, use your spiritual aura to enter his meridians and slowly nourish them. Guide his spiritual aura back to his meridians. Don't worry, I'll tell you what to do." Without time to explain, Lord Daoist Jinghe helped Qin Shi up and told Mo Tiange to place her palm on the Lingtai acupoint on his back, then pour her spiritual aura into it. Mo Tiange did as she was told and slowly poured her spiritual aura in, but her whole body trembled. The spiritual aura in Qin Shi's body was completely out of control. A cultivator's spiritual aura was generally controlled inside his meridians. It flowed between his meridians and finally gathered in his dantian, just like blood. However, the spiritual aura in Qin Shi's body was now running around everywhere. It wasn't bound by his meridians at all. This kind of situation was quite dangerous. Cultivators cultivated both their meridians and their bodies, but their meridians were always more important than their bodies. Although their bodies were full of spiritual aura, they definitely couldn't withstand the dense spiritual aura in their meridians. In particular, the higher one's cultivation level was, the more severe this kind of situation was. Qin Shi was now a peak stage core formation cultivator, so the density of the spiritual aura in his body was no small matter. Right now, the spiritual aura running around in his body was already riddled with internal injuries. If he hadn't practiced body refining techniques, he probably would have been half dead by now. Mo Tiange's spiritual aura entered his body, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no trace of it, and she couldn't guide it at all. The gap between their cultivation levels was too big. "Master." Just as she was about to ask something, she immediately discovered that her spiritual aura was also out of control. It was being guided by a force, rushing madly into Qin Shi's body. Chapter 253. Master. Mo Tiange couldn't help but call out. Her own spiritual aura was also out of control. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression froze. He pressed his palm on the top of Mo Tiange's head and shouted, "Don't worry. Take your time to control your spiritual aura." A powerful spiritual aura pressure suppressed Mo Tiange's almost out of control spiritual aura. With a nascent soul cultivator keeping watch, Mo Tiange finally calmed down and regained control. The spiritual aura inside Qin Shi's body was now rampaging and riddled with scars. Mo Tiange also felt uncomfortable when she poured her spiritual aura into his body. Her cultivation level was much lower, so once her spiritual aura entered his body, it would be taken away and she couldn't guide Qin Shi's spiritual aura at all. Even with Lord Daoist Jinghe's support, she could only barely control her spiritual aura. However, she couldn't resist the mutual attraction of yin and yang spiritual aura. The two streams of spiritual energy intertwined with each other, both absorbing her spiritual energy and drawing in his spiritual energy. Gradually, the meridians of the two connected, forming a great circulation. At this point, Mo Tiange didn't need to guide anything anymore. Their spiritual auras automatically mixed and slowly recovered some kind of pattern. His spiritual aura gradually withdrew from every part of his body and gathered in his meridians, connecting with hers and slowly devouring all her yin spiritual aura. When Mo Tiange woke up, she couldn't tell where she was. She wanted to get up, but her vision blurred. Auntie. Her vision gradually became clear. She forced a smile. Jinji? Yi Jinji looked at her, wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, he just said, Auntie, Grandmaster said your spiritual aura is exhausted, so don't rush to move. Cultivate for a few days and recover your spiritual aura first. Really? She rubbed her brows and suddenly remembered. How's your master? Master. He shook his head. His situation is complicated. Auntie should ask Grandmaster about the details. But he's fine. He just won't wake up for a while. I see. She thought for a moment then asked, how long have I been unconscious? 4 hours, Yi Jinji said. Auntie, you should rest for a while. Grandmaster said you're too tired. You should rest well so you can recover your vitality sooner. Mo Tiange nodded. To make an inappropriate analogy, her current situation was as if she'd been completely plucked. She'd lost all the spiritual energy in her body, and she needed to slowly meditate and adjust her breathing in order to recover as quickly as possible. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered, your master is seriously injured. As his disciple, you should be attending to him. Why are you here with me? Yi Jinji hesitated. But Auntie, you also, Mo Tiange said, I'm fine now, so you can go. After all, you are your master's only disciple. If you don't do some things, no one will do them. Don't think that it doesn't matter, understand? Yes. It wasn't that Yi Jinji didn't understand. When he looked at Mo Tiange again, he saw that aside from her pale complexion, there wasn't anything abnormal about her, so he said, Auntie, I'll be going now. If you have something to say, you must tell me. I know. Don't worry. Once she sent Yi Jinji away, she closed her eyes and collapsed again. After a while, she regained her strength, stood up, opened the restrictions on Mingxin residence, entered the virtual sky world, and began to adjust her breathing. Although the late stage of the foundation building realm and the peak stage of the core formation realm were only one big realm apart, the spiritual aura difference was dozens of times. If Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't present, her realm would have probably regressed due to the gap between their cultivation levels. Fortunately, she only had empty spiritual aura now, and her meridians and dantian were still intact. As long as she cultivated slowly for several days, her spiritual aura would naturally recover. In the next few days, aside from when Yi Jinji and Lord Daoist Jinghe came, Mo Tiange stayed in the virtual sky world to adjust her breathing. The virtual sky world was full of spiritual aura. Coupled with the many panaceas Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her, it only took Mo Tiange 3 to 5 days to recover. She left the virtual sky world and went to the main hall of Shangqing Palace. Lord Daoist Jinghe was sitting and looking at the sky, thinking about something. Master? Lord Daoist Jinghe regained his train of thought and saw her. Oh, Tiange, are you all right? Mo Tiange dawdled for a while before finally sitting in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe. Is Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing all right? He's fine. Lord Daoist Jinghe's gaze seemed to contain some kind of deep meaning. He stared at her for a long time as if he was probing her. He then said, "You don't seem surprised at all." Mo Tiange didn't understand what he meant. Surprised about what? Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled and said, "I remember you've been my disciple for so many years, but you've never met your Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. I've also never mentioned his name in front of you." Mo Tiange was stunned. She realized what he wanted to say, so she lowered her head in silence. Lord Daoist Jinghe heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "It seems I don't need to say anything. You already knew." Mo Tiange was silent but calm. She knew Qin Shi, but she'd never met Qin Shoujing. When she saw him that day, she didn't have any doubts that he was a core formation cultivator. Today, she even asked about Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing as if it was a matter of course. What did this mean? Lord Daoist Jinghe picked up the wine cup and drank it. He then looked at her again. "Can you tell Master when you found out?" Mo Tiange lowered her head and fiddled with the jade pendant on her waist. This spirit-concealing pendant was originally hanging around her neck, but it was snatched away by Ruan Mingzhu in the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation. Later, when she woke up, it was Yizhenji who returned it to her. The round jade pendant was engraved with exquisite cloud patterns. In the middle of one side, a small, Qin character was engraved. When she was 10 years old, she obtained this jade pendant and it never left her side. In her spare time, she also held the jade pendant and thought about what its previous owner was like. Did he have bad intentions? Later, when she came to Xianqing school, it wasn't that she didn't want to meet Master Daoist Shoujing, but she never had the chance to. That was until she entered Zhong Muling's virtual sky world during the demonic beast riot. In the year of the demonic beast riot, I went to war with Senior Marshal Sister Suxin. Lord Daoist Jinghe was stunned. So early? Mo Tiange lowered her head and smiled, but there was no smile in her eyes. At first, I never thought about it. Until that year when I went to war with Senior Marshal Sister Suxin. We went to Luoyan Cliff and accidentally entered Great Ancestor's virtual sky world. I heard Great Ancestors say that Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing went missing for several days because he accidentally entered Great Ancestor's illusory sky formation. Later, Great Ancestor said there was a boy surnamed Qin, who came to look for me. I thought it was Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing, but it turned out to be Senior Marshal Brother Qin. You became suspicious just because of that? Mo Tiange shook her head. At that time, I just thought it was very strange. Later, when we left the virtual sky world, Senior Marshal Brother Qin was obviously injured, but I heard Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing was heavily injured and went back to Mount Taikang. Later, I never heard any news about Senior Marshal Brother Qin again. Lord Daoist Jinghe was silent for a long time before he finally said, "No wonder you never asked about that, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, all these years." In the virtual sky world, Great Ancestor once talked to another deification senior in front of me. He said Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing had a yang spiritual bead. At that time, I didn't know what a yang spiritual bead was. Later, Senior Marshal Brother Qin came to look for me. Great Ancestor also said Senior Marshal Brother Qin had metal and fire dual spiritual roots, both of which belonged to the yang attribute, and he also had a yang spiritual bead. I became suspicious. Many things about Qin Shoujing weren't secrets in Xianqing school. For example, he had metal and fire dual spiritual roots. Even an ordinary part-time disciple would know about this. Moreover, even if she didn't know what a yang spiritual bead was, from what Great Ancestor said, she also understood it was a rare spiritual treasure in the world. How could two people have it at the same time? At this point, Mo Tiange smiled again. There are some things that might be normal if you don't have any suspicions, but if you have suspicions, you'll feel like there are flaws everywhere. After I had this thought, I carefully thought about it. Which part of the so-called Senior Marshal Brother Qin looked like a low-level cultivator? When he was in Yunwu sect, he didn't like to talk to low-level disciples like us because the difference in realms was too big, so he had nothing to say. Later, when my secret was leaked and second uncle and I escaped from Mount Yunwu, we were besieged by a group of foundation-building cultivators. As soon as senior marshal brother Qin arrived, he saved us. I originally thought he had some kind of secret technique and it was inconvenient for him to tell me. Later, I thought everything would make sense if he was a core formation cultivator. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. Master also thought I couldn't hide it from you for too long, but I never heard you mention it all these years, so I thought I really hid it from you. The most important thing is, if senior marshal brother Qin really existed, why was he unknown in Xianqing school? I never thought I'd find an excuse for senior marshal brother Qin, but after I thought about it, I realized it was completely reasonable to replace senior marshal brother Shoujing's identity with senior marshal brother Qin's. Lord Daoist Jinghe heaved a long sigh. Then why didn't you tell me all these years? Mo Tiange kept her head lowered and stared at her toes. She was silent for a while before she said softly. Master, to be honest, I felt very uncomfortable at that time. I didn't understand why. I was very grateful to senior marshal brother Qin for taking care of me all the way back then, but when I suddenly discovered this matter, I always wondered what he was trying to do. Lord Daoist Jinghe, who had been quietly listening to her, now frowned and shook his head. You've always been steady, but you're still young, and your temperament is a bit suspicious. When you suddenly discovered this matter, you inevitably panicked and always thought about the worst. What happened after that? After that, I paid attention for a long time. Sure enough, if I didn't ask, there seemed to be no trace of senior marshal brother Qin in the whole of Xianqing school. At that time, I even suspected that his name was fake, right? Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. His name was real. However, before Shi-Er formed his gold core, he didn't use his real identity when he was outside. After he formed his gold core, according to the school's rules, he didn't use his real name anymore and used his Daoist name. Not to mention outsiders, even among the disciples of the school, only a few know his real name. Mo Tiange also smiled. She didn't know whether she should feel a bit gratified or not. At least his name was real. Lord Daoist Jinghe asked again, it's been several decades, but you never said it. Is it because you mind or because you've forgiven him? Mo Tiange paused for a while then said slowly. In terms of identity, he's your blood-related descendant and also your direct disciple. I was accepted by Master as your disciple because of him. In terms of cultivation level, he's a core formation cultivator and is about to advance to the nascent soul realm, but I haven't formed my gold core yet. What position do I have to forgive him or not? Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned. You're belittling yourself like this. Could it be that you still have resentment in your heart? Chapter 254. Mo Tiange was silent for a while then shook her head. I'm not belittling myself, it's just the truth. I know the difference between the peak stage of the core formation realm and the late stage of the foundation building realm. Even if I'm talented, I'm still a foundation building cultivator before I form my core or nascent soul. Lord Daoist Jinghe sighed. I really don't know if you're clear-headed or if you're too demanding on yourself. None of his disciples were like her. She was already a nascent soul cultivator's disciple, but she still regarded herself as an ordinary foundation-building cultivator. Mo Tiange looked up with a smile. Master, when have I ever belittled myself? In Xianqing school, I can do whatever I want. I can look down on them in terms of status, but I can't in terms of mentality. After a long time, Lord Daoist Jinghe finally said, You're very smart. Although you're not the most intelligent among Master's disciples, you're the smartest. Knowing where one should stand and what one should do, this was also a kind of wisdom. After saying that, Lord Daoist Jinghe immediately asked, You think you're in no position to forgive him? What's your attitude towards him? Mo Tiange was silent again. There were some things even she herself wasn't sure about. Master, Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing and my father are friends, so I should regard him as an elder, but, when I met him, I only thought he was an ordinary aura refining disciple. Lord Daoist Jinghe heard the hesitation in her words and couldn't help but say, when your father met he was almost 300 years old, right? And, if we're talking about age, your father is almost 200 years older than him. Besides, they were just in trouble together, so how could there be a difference in seniority between you two? Besides, we cultivators don't stick to seniority. There are precedents even between master and disciple. Mo Tiange lowered her head and said nothing. She didn't stick to seniority, she just needed to find a reason for herself. I've seen it all these years. If you didn't care about him, you wouldn't have been unwilling to mention him for dozens of years, master. Mo Tiange called out hurriedly. She looked up at Lord Daoist Jinghe, then lowered her head again and said slowly, don't talk nonsense. I didn't think about anything. Lord Daoist Jinghe paused and said anxiously, why didn't you think about anything? You clearly. Master. Mo Tiange once again interrupted him with a frown. What are you talking about? Lord Daoist Jinghe could sense the blame in her words, so he thought about it and decided not to say anything. Young girls were always more troublesome. It was not good to say too much and embarrass them. All right. Lord Daoist Jinghe retreated in defeat. I won't talk about this matter anymore. Between the two of you, one wants to form his nascent soul, while the other wants to form her gold core. It's not the right time. By the way, if you've recovered, go and help your senior martial brother heal his injuries. His spiritual energy has already returned to his meridians, but his injuries haven't healed yet. Your spiritual energy is the best for him to heal his injuries, don't worry about any more problems. His spiritual energy has already flowed smoothly, so he won't forcefully absorb your spiritual energy anymore. Mo Tiange wanted to refuse, but Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't give her a chance to do so. Right after he finished speaking, he assumed a cultivation posture and closed his eyes. Go quickly. It's already very early. After hesitating for a while, she finally obediently left Shangqing Palace. After she left, Lord Daoist Jinghe opened his eyes and said to himself, this kind of matter. I'll let you talk about it yourself. That brat will wake up soon, it all depends on your luck. Mo Tiange's mind was extremely chaotic. She stood at the gate of Shangqing Palace for a while, then sent a summoning talisman. Before long, Yizhenji rushed over and said happily, Auntie, are you all right? Mo Tiange smiled somewhat absent-mindedly. How's your master? Master's fine, he just hasn't woken up yet. Yizhenji was a bit confused. Did she specifically call him over just to ask about this? She could have asked him through the summoning talisman. Take me to see him. Huh? Mo Tiange made up her mind and said, your grandmaster ordered me to heal your master. Yizhenji was stunned for a moment, but he suddenly understood what Lord Daoist Jinghe meant. He wanted to say something, but he felt there were some things he couldn't say, so he could only swallow his words. Got it. Auntie, come with me. The two of them flew to an uninhabited hilltop. Yizhenji was the first to land. Mo Tiange looked around. She felt this place was very familiar. She saw Yizhenji walking towards a bare rock wall, making a series of hand seals, then using a jade talisman to open a formation. All of a sudden, she had a flash of inspiration. She finally understood why this place looked so familiar. This was the place where she rejected Bai Yanfei when she was pestered by him. Auntie? Yizhenji stared at her pale and red face, not understanding what was going on. Upon hearing his voice, Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. She wiped the sweat on her forehead, forced herself to calm down and walked into the cave. Forget it, forget it. How long has it been? Even if I remember, I'm afraid he doesn't. This immortal's cave wasn't much different from the original Mingxin residence. It didn't have exquisite carvings, nor did it have gorgeous and noble furnishings. It was just extremely spacious. In terms of spiritual aura, it was also one of the few spiritual lands on Clear Spring Peak. It wasn't much worse than Shunqing Palace. Master loved luxury, but every disciple he taught was different from him. Whether it was martial uncle Xianyin, senior martial sister Su Xin, this senior martial brother Shoujing, or even herself, none of them liked extravagance. This phenomenon was actually quite interesting. Yi Zhenji took her to the innermost stone room as he let his imagination run wild. After making a series of hand seals, the stone door opened. This stone room was still very simple. With a glance, she saw Qin Shi lying on the frost jade bed. His clothes had already been changed, so he wasn't as disheveled as he was that day. However, his complexion was still deathly pale, and he was lying there silently. Mo Tiange slowly approached him and stared at the face she hadn't seen for a long time. His appearance was actually very handsome. Even in the cultivation world, where handsome men were everywhere, he didn't lose out to others. His deep eyebrows were like the lines of a sculpture. Presumably, even if he was old, he'd still look like Lord Daoist Jinghe, still giving people a sense of heroic spirit. However, she missed the Qin Shi from Mount Yunwu. Although he was somewhat handsome, he wore the clothes of a low-level disciple and was unremarkable everywhere. Even though he didn't have the slightest bit of elegance back then, even though his cultivation level was extremely low, even now, she had to admit that 40 years of time didn't erase her love for him. Even though they hadn't met for 30 years, his face was still deeply engraved in her heart. What was love? She was still confused, but she remembered that the man she fell in love with in the 10,000 laws of nature formation and when she was under the 5 hindrances overturning senses was his appearance. So what if she admitted it? During those 2 months, she had a good impression of him. In the following few years, her feelings gradually faded, but she suddenly discovered his deception. Thus, from that moment on, she always missed him and felt restless. The more she remembered and thought about him, the more she couldn't erase him from her heart like before. Some feelings couldn't be explained clearly, and some feelings couldn't be explained clearly. She tried her best to make herself forget him, but she couldn't. Thus, she told herself that if she got him, she should be happy, but if she couldn't, she shouldn't worry about him. It had been 30 years, and she had done it. However, she had to admit that she wanted to stand at the top of the world and hold the whole world in her hands, but she still hoped that he was still standing by her side. Just like that dream. Auntie? Yi Zhenji's voice rang in her ears. Mo Tiange regained her train of thought and saw the bewilderment on his face. Her face was a bit hot, so she turned her head away without looking at Yi Zhenji's eyes and said, "Auntie has to treat your master's injuries. You should go." "Yes." After hesitating for a while, Yi Zhenji finally went out obediently. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief and pulled herself together. She then helped Qin Shi up, sat behind him, and raised her palm to press the Lingtai acupoint on his back. Her spiritual aura slowly penetrated his meridians without any obstruction. When it entered his meridians, she still felt a sticky force, but it wasn't as strong as it was that day. She slowly controlled her spiritual aura and added it to his spiritual aura. The yin and yang spiritual aura naturally mixed together, and in the end, he seized control of her spiritual aura. Although this time, he still slowly seized her spiritual aura, the process was slow, and the power he used wasn't strong. Besides, the process of treating other people's injuries consumed spiritual aura. Mo Tiange didn't know that when she was unconscious, Qin Shi not only didn't consume any spiritual aura when he treated her, but it even increased. This was also the reason why the gap between their cultivation levels was too big. For Qin Shi, treating her injuries and tempering her body didn't require too much spiritual aura, and he more or less obtained some spiritual aura from her. But compared to him, Mo Tiange only had this much spiritual aura. Qin Shi automatically absorbed too much spiritual aura from her, so her spiritual aura decreased instead of increasing. After a while, half of the spiritual aura in her body was used up, so Mo Tiange made a prompt decision and stopped injecting spiritual aura into his body. If she absorbed too much spiritual aura, she wouldn't be able to stop even if she stopped. She put Qin Shi down again, wanting to see his expression, but what she saw shocked her. She saw Qin Shi slowly opening his eyes. He actually woke up. Although she admitted this in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe, Mo Tiange still wasn't ready to face him. She was stunned for a moment, then she turned around, wanting to leave. However, her wrist was grabbed, and she couldn't move. Tiange. His hoarse voice rang out. Mo Tiange stood there, motionless. She couldn't leave, but she also didn't want to turn around. Confusion appeared on Qin Shi's face. He discovered that his meridians were flowing with both familiar and strange spiritual aura. After a long time, he finally said with a sigh, it was just a sentence, but it made her feel tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. The two of them were silent. He didn't let go, but she also didn't turn around. This was the first time he faced her with the identity of Qin Shojing. He didn't hide his cultivation level or his identity. "What should I call you?" He heard her soft voice. "Senior Marshal Brother Qin or Senior Marshal Brother Shojing?" He was still silent, unable to say even half a word. Thus, she turned around and looked at him with a distant and strange gaze. "Tell me, what should I call you? Is it important who I am?" He moved his gaze, raised his head, and looked at her. "Qin Shi is me, and Qin Shojing is also me. Whether it's Qin Shi or Qin Shojing, they're both the same person." "Yes, they're both the same person." Mo Tiange stared at him. She slowly raised her smiling face, but her gaze was ice cold. "But the meaning is completely different." He saw the indifference and alienation in her eyes, so he was a bit stiff. He couldn't help but want to ask, "Why is it different?" Mo Tiange smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Senior Marshal Brother Shojing, there are some things you don't need to say too clearly." It was just a form of address, but it already explained her attitude. Qin Shi didn't say anything. Thus, she gently shook off his hand, turned around, and left. Chapter 255. She never went to Qin Shi's Immortal's Cave again. Since he had already woken up, his injuries were already healed. She didn't need to do anything else. Lord Daoist Jinghe always wanted to sound her out about what happened that day, but she didn't say anything. Before long, Mo Tiange heard he was in closed-door meditation to attempt to form his nascent soul. Regarding this, she was very puzzled. Shouldn't he be resting for a few years after being seriously injured? Why was he in such a hurry to break through? Mo Tiange didn't ask this question, so she only heard Lord Daoist Jinghe vaguely mention it. It turned out that he had obtained all of her spiritual energy and comprehended a new cultivation technique. Perhaps it would be helpful for him to break through, so he was in a hurry to go into closed-door meditation. Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed when she heard what he said. Soon after, she laughed at herself. Since she'd already gotten over it, why did she have to be like this? No matter what, love wasn't as important as the path to immortality. Just like how he was in a hurry to form his nascent soul, she should also be thinking about forming her gold core. Thus, after preparing for several days, she reported to her master and decided to go into secluded meditation. He set up restrictions and closed the Immortal's Cave. Mingxin residents no longer allowed anyone to enter or leave. He then entered the virtual sky world and began to meditate in closed-door meditation. Cultivation knew no time. Year after year. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, light flashed by. Unknowingly, more than 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, many things had happened. For example, when Han Xingyu formed her gold core, Marshal Uncle Xianin, who oversaw Sweet Dew Peak, finally had his first core formation disciple and started to have the imposing manner of a nascent soul cultivator. For example, as Yi Jingwen guessed correctly, Bai Yanfei didn't marry junior marshal sister Jiang in the end. Instead, he married senior marshal sister Wu, whom he always disdained, who was Marshal Uncle Miaoyi's last disciple. Another example would be Marshal Uncle Ling Su passing away in meditation. First, junior Marshall's sister Jiang was disappointed in love, and then she suffered such a blow. She shut herself in the drifting cloud peak all day and rarely saw people. Luo Fengshue's guess was also correct. For example, after Marshall Uncle Lingshu passed away in meditation, none of the several Xianqing school disciples who were in closed-door meditation succeeded in forming their nascent souls, including Qin Shoujing. In the first year of Mo Tiange's closed-door meditation, after Qin Shi's injuries healed, he formally entered closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. 2 years later, he finally failed. Another 4 years passed, and he once again went into seclusion to break through to the nascent soul realm, but he still didn't succeed. 16 years passed in a flash. Mo Tiange finally reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm and temporarily came out of her closed-door meditation. Reaching the peak stage of the foundation building realm at the age of 78 was still an inconceivable age. Even with Qin Shoujing's outstanding achievements, Clear Spring Peak's gloomy mood caused by Qin Shoujing's repeated failures to form his nascent soul also somewhat dissipated. In fact, if Mo Tiange hadn't deliberately suppressed her cultivation speed and suffered serious injuries several times, she should have formed her gold core by now. However, the path of cultivation was filled with thorns. Being heavily injured or even having one's cultivation regress was a path that cultivators had to take, so there was no need to dwell on it. Mo Tiange was sitting in Mingxin Residence's small reception hall, listening to Luo Fengshue's idle chatter with her. She lowered her head and remained silent for a long time. Luo Fengshue had already advanced into the middle stage of the foundation building realm. She'd never been good at cultivating, so among elite disciples, her cultivation level could only be considered average, but it wasn't bad either. Tiange, Tiange. Huh? Mo Tiange snapped out of her trance. Luo Fengshue complained, "What are you doing? Why are you absent-minded? If you continue like this, I'll leave." Don't. Although Mo Tiange was absent-minded, she was seriously listening to the news Luo Fengshue was talking about. I'm just in a daze. If you leave, who can I talk to? I can't find anyone to talk to in the entire Clear Spring Peak. Oh. Luo Fengshue was surprised. Why isn't there anyone to talk to? Doesn't Grandmaster have a lot of maids? Besides, I remember you have a nephew. He'll talk to you, won't he? Mo Tiange sighed. I really don't get along with those maids. In the past, they liked to set me up, but after I beat them up, they were convinced and became afraid of me again. Jinji went out to gain experience. That brat's actually quite motivated. He knows he doesn't have enough experience. As for Master, he could have talked to him, but he's obviously in a bad mood these days, so I didn't provoke him. Grandmaster's in a bad mood? Luo Fengshue thought for a moment then asked, is it because Marshall Uncle Shoujing failed to form his nascent soul? Probably. Mo Tiange lowered her head and answered faintly, I think Master's certainly disappointed. Although he always said senior Marshall brother Shoujing formed his gold core too early and should have done things more steadily, seeing him fail again and again, it'd be strange if he wasn't anxious. If I were him, I'd also be anxious, Luo Fengshue said with a frown. Alas. I'm so angry. Before Marshall Uncle Shoujing formed his nascent soul, many people in the school said he'd definitely succeed. But now, everyone says soul formation isn't core formation, and whether Marshall Uncle Shoujing is a genius or not can only be determined by his soul formation. Although Luo Fengshue moved to Sweet Dew Peak with Lord Daoist Xianyin, Clear Spring Peak was the place she belonged to since she was a child, so she always felt unhappy when others talked about Clear Spring Peak. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, was calm. She smiled and said, if they want to say it, then say it. I think although Master must feel uncomfortable, he still doesn't care about those people. That's true. Luo Fengshue mumbled then said, in fact, I also find it strange that Marshall Uncle Shoujing actually failed to form his nascent soul. Moreover, he failed twice in a row. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have believed it. Mo Tiange was stunned. She then asked with a smile, why? Isn't it normal to fail to form one's nascent soul? I remember that among the nascent soul lords in our school, only the head Grand Supreme Elder succeeded in his first attempt. The others all succeeded several times, right? Lord Daoist Miaoi, who was also known as a genius, also tried to form her nascent soul 3 times before she advanced. That's true, but this is martial Uncle Shoujing. Luo Fengxue emphasized. Because he's martial Uncle Shoujing, everyone thinks he should succeed in his first attempt. How could that be? Mo Tiange shook her head. She thought to herself, in the end, it's because Qin Shoujing was deified that those rumors started, right? Presumably, with his double spiritual roots, he surpassed geniuses with single spiritual roots. He formed his gold core at 78 years old and reached the peak stage of the core formation realm at 175 years old. What a genius! Precisely because he was such a genius, everyone had high expectations of him. They felt that if he didn't form his nascent soul in his first attempt, he wouldn't be worthy of his extraordinary reputation as a genius. In reality, he was just an ordinary cultivator. Even though he cultivated diligently and possessed rare treasures, he would still encounter bottlenecks like other cultivators. His cultivation level didn't come out of thin air. You don't say. In fact, I heard some things from Grandmaster. The reason why martial Uncle Shoujing failed to form his nascent soul was because there was a loophole in his mental state. Grandmaster was very worried about this. Loophole in his mental state. Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat. She recalled that day 16 years ago. But in the next moment, she shook her head and laughed at herself. How could she have such great charm? It had nothing to do with her. It's nothing. She said slowly, many people simply don't realize the existence of a loophole in their mental state before they encounter it. Besides, senior martial brother Shoujing hasn't even reached 200 years old yet, so what's there to be anxious about? I've never heard of anyone forming their nascent soul before 200 years old in the history of the celestial pole. That's true, but martial Uncle Shoujing seems to be very anxious this time. It's been 8 years since he last failed to form his nascent soul. During these 8 years, he tried every means possible to find a lot of treasures. I heard he's going to enter closed-door meditation again now. So fast. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. Although it was normal for people to fail to form their nascent soul, it was unusual for him to enter closed-door meditation so frequently. As far as she knew, cultivators in the celestial pole who failed to form their nascent soul would only enter closed-door meditation again after more than 10 years. If the time was too short, not only would the loophole in their mental state not disappear, but it would also become more serious. The time it took Qin Shi to form his nascent soul 3 times was indeed a bit too short. This time, it took him 8 years, and the last time, it was even shorter, only 4 years. You also think martial Uncle Shoujing is too anxious, right? Luo Fengxue shook her head and sighed. I asked my master, but he also didn't understand what was going on. Grandmaster also didn't say anything and just let him do whatever he wanted. I found it strange. Could it be that Grandmaster isn't afraid of martial Uncle Shoujing having problems forming his nascent soul? Forming one's nascent soul wasn't the same as forming one's gold core. The risk of forming one's gold core was relatively low. As long as there was someone guarding the core formation process and they wouldn't be disturbed by others, generally speaking, there wouldn't be any danger. Even if they failed, they would just have to start all over again. But forming one's nascent soul was different. If one failed in forming one's nascent soul, it was very likely that they would be lost in their inner demon. There was also a possibility that when their gold core shattered, they wouldn't be able to successfully form their nascent soul and their cultivation level would dissipate just like that. In other words, if one failed in forming one's nascent soul, it was best to do it before one's gold core shattered. If one couldn't guide the spiritual aura contained in the shattered gold core back to their dantian after one's gold core shattered, their cultivation level might be crippled. Not only would they no longer have the opportunity to form their nascent soul, but they would also be inferior to core formation cultivators. Mo Tiange also frowned when she thought up to this point. Yes, this is too strange. After obtaining Mo Tiange's approval, Luo Fengxue said, in fact, it's not that Grandmaster isn't worried. Why doesn't he care? I'm afraid he can't care even if he wants to, Mo Tiange said. Master always said he's too opinionated, so he can't be persuaded. At this point, Mo Tiange was also puzzled. He wasn't an impulsive person. He always made plans before he acted. Why did he insist on doing this when everyone knew it wasn't feasible? Could it be that he had no other choice? After Luo Fengxue said something else, Mo Tiange once again became absent-minded. In the end, Luo Fengxue lost interest and wanted to leave. Mo Tiange apologized to Luo Fengxue and didn't ask her to stay. Her mind was indeed in a mess right now, so it wasn't the time to gossip. Mo Tiange had just reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm, so she planned to relax for several years before entering closed-door meditation to form her gold core. 3 years later, Qin Shi's third attempt to form his nascent soul still ended in failure. Fortunately, he didn't lose himself in his inner demon, nor did he lose his cultivation because of his gold core. However, this blow made him quiet down. Even when Mo Tiange entered closed-door meditation to form her gold core, she didn't hear any news about him. It was as if he never left his immortal's cave again. Everyone said Qin Shojing still had double spiritual roots. No matter how fast his cultivation level advanced before he formed his nascent soul, he wasn't a real genius. They completely forgot what they said before. Qin Shojing, with his double spiritual roots, managed to form his gold core at the age of 78. That alone was enough for him to be called a genius. At the same time, Master Daoist Lingxi, Xianqing School's single spiritual root cultivator, reached the peak stage of the core formation realm and entered closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. As a result, Li Lingxi, who had always been overshadowed by Qin Shojing, started to be recognized as a genius. The title of genius of Xianqing School's new generation finally changed. However, Mo Tiange didn't have the chance to hear about any of this. After Qin Shi failed to form his nascent soul, she once again closed her immortal's cave and set restrictions. Even Lord Daoist Jinghe was blocked outside the door as he entered the virtual sky world to try to form his gold core. Chapter 256. During core formation, Mo Tiange entered the virtual sky world and deliberately left a stone sculpture puppet outside to disguise itself as her. When she cultivated, she could use formations to confuse Lord Daoist Jinghe's divine sense. In any case, he wouldn't care too much about it. But during core formation, Lord Daoist Jinghe's divine sense would definitely pay close attention to this place. For the sake of the virtual sky world secrets, it was better to make it more realistic. Fortunately, she obtained the Xuanji formation book, so the technique of formations was far from ordinary. The stone sculpture puppet itself had spiritual aura fluctuations of the late stage of the foundation building realm, so it wouldn't be a problem for her to disguise herself as her. However, after she formed her gold core and came out of the virtual sky world, she had to make some tricks to create the celestial phenomenon of core formation. Then, inside the virtual sky world, she put the medicinal pills she usually concocted and some treasures Lord Daoist Jinghe prepared for her to form her gold core in a proper place. First was the dustless pill. This pill wasn't the same as the foundation building pill used for foundation building. To be exact, it was a kind of medicinal pill to defend against inner demons. Because inner demons were the biggest threat during core formation, it was the most important medicinal pill for core formation. This had always been the case since ancient times. In ancient times, the only medicinal pill used to defend against inner demons was the dustless pill. Next was the extreme purity pill. This pill contained a large amount of spiritual aura and had a similar effect to the foundation building pill. After taking this pill, the body would instantly release a large amount of spiritual aura. With the help of this spiritual aura, the cultivator could begin to break through to the core formation realm. Finally, there was the immortal wind dew. This dew was a medicinal pill in the form of liquid. It was concocted from the liquid of 7 leaves: purple heart lotus and jade heart grass, along with dozens of kinds of immortal roots and spiritual plants. It was a pill recipe found in the virtual sky world. Mo Tiange saw that this spiritual medicine was helpful for core formation, and the main ingredients were already available in the virtual sky world, so she paid attention to the outside world to find the missing ingredients. She had just concocted it a while ago. After doing all this, Mo Tiange began to meditate. She didn't think about anything and let her mind become as still as water. In fact, she had never been as confident as she was today. She was no longer the aura-refining disciple who possessed 5 spiritual roots despite possessing a pure Yin constitution. She was no longer the same aura-refining disciple whose aptitude was akin to trash. She had extraordinary aptitude, a large number of spiritual herbs, an extraordinary formation, and a cultivation environment that was not inferior to the one in the distant past era. Why would she need to worry about making a realm breakthrough? He slowly adjusted his breathing and circulated his spiritual energy, immersing himself in the cycle of spiritual energy. Inside the Dantian, there was a small area that not only contained Yin Qi, but also Yang Qi. Unlike ordinary people, where Yin and Yang were mixed together, they fused with each other to form a cycle. When the cycle of Yin and Yang reached a balance, the 5 elements would take on both Yin and Yang forms, forming the state of primordial chaos. Although the Yang's spiritual energy in his body was very little, it was enough to occupy a corner deep in his Dantian. Starting from this small chaotic element circulation, Mo Tiange guided the Yin spiritual aura in her body and slowly breathed in and out. Inside the virtual sky world, countless pure spiritual auras surrounded her. Gradually, she entered a state of nothingness. In the primordial wilderness, at the beginning of the world, the gods appeared. In the ancient vast expanse, the gods had created man, and man had appeared. The gods left the world, immortals and demons separated, and the world changed. The desolation of ancient times, the rebirth of mankind, the war between the righteous and the demonic, millions of years of time flowed before her eyes. She experienced the wind and clouds from the distant past era. This was the unique aura of the distant past era in the virtual sky world. It was as if she was also a speck of dust from the distant past era, drifting for hundreds of thousands of years. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. She felt her mind was like dust, rising and falling with the wind. Although it was ups and downs, it didn't cause any waves. She took the extreme clear pill, the dew of immortality, and the dustless pill in succession. When she took the foundation building pill, it was different from the spiritual aura vortex that seemed to explode. The extreme clear pill was gentle. It slowly slid down her throat and into her stomach. A warmth like that of a warm sun spread out, gradually submerging her entire body. This reminded her of when she was young. Every winter, her mother would often sit outside the house with her and bask in the sun. It was lazy and warm, as if she was in her mother's embrace. Mo Tiange lost her consciousness at this moment, and the spiritual aura in her body began to contract naturally. At the same time, countless spiritual aura from the virtual sky world rushed towards her, rushing towards her body. Her eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and every pore on her skin opened to accept the spiritual aura and block the impurities. Only the purest Yin spiritual aura was accepted. This process lasted for a long time, but Mo Tiange's consciousness had already melted in the aura of the distant past era. Even a year felt like a few days to her. Time passed day by day. One day, Mo Tiange suddenly felt an explosive pain in her body, from her dantian to her meridians to her 5 viscera and 6 bowels. She sobered up, but she couldn't do anything. She could only let the Yin spiritual aura wreak havoc in her body. However, unlike spiritual aura going out of control, the Yin spiritual aura filled her whole body, and her meridians and dantian completely contained it. It was just that the speed at which it increased was too fast, so it violently clashed with her meridians and dantian, which were trying to restrain it. This kind of conflict brought twisted pain. Mo Tiange gritted her teeth and endured it. She did her best to breathe according to Lord Daoist Jinghe's instructions, letting the spiritual aura in her body return to a regular pattern. She didn't know how much time had passed, but her body finally adapted to the pain caused by the spiritual aura expanding. She could finally control the small mass of spiritual aura of the origin inside her body. She placed this mass of spiritual aura at the entrance of her dantian and sea of knowledge to protect the most important place. After doing this, the meridians could no longer contain the spiritual aura, so it rushed towards her dantian. Mo Tiange firmly controlled the mass of spiritual aura of the origin, letting her dantian swallow the spiritual aura. When her dantian was full of spiritual aura, there was still a lot of spiritual aura rushing in from the outside. Therefore, this kind of pain became even more intense. She almost thought her dantian and meridians would be torn apart because they couldn't contain the spiritual aura anymore. But they didn't. When the spiritual aura couldn't contain it anymore, it began to be squeezed. They originally existed like liquid, but after being squeezed, they became even finer and there were almost no gaps between them. Mo Tiange knew the most critical moment had come. She closed her eyes. She had completely adapted to this kind of pain caused by the spiritual aura squeezing her dantian. But now, she still had to see whether the process of the spiritual aura squeezing could proceed smoothly. She breathed steadily, opened her meridians, and tightened her dantian. Sometimes, a container that was obviously full could always unexpectedly be stuffed with more things. Mo Tiange's dantian was like this right now. The spiritual aura was full, but it was still pouring in. The spiritual aura that was like liquid gradually became more and more viscous, almost glued together. Her dantian was expanding, and so were her meridians. Mo Tiange had completely adapted to this kind of squeezing pain. Her body felt like it was being torn apart. If the spiritual aura was a bit more violent, her body would explode and she wouldn't have any limbs left. However, the power of the extreme clear pill was gentle, so the spiritual aura was slowly being compressed. The dew of immortality was also playing its role. The warm immortal liquid nourished her meridians and dantian, helping them to expand and repairing the damage they received during the process of expansion and compression. At this time, the benefits of the five spirits' body cultivation in her meridians and dantian manifested. Mo Tiange wasn't like other people who had their meridians broken and failed at the last step due to a little carelessness. Her meridians were flexible. Although it was very painful to be squeezed, they still firmly wrapped around the spiritual aura. If there was any damage, the dew of immortality would repair it little by little. In front of such tough meridians, the spiritual aura could only retreat, so they squeezed each other and narrowed the distance between them. Finally, at the entrance of her sea of knowledge, where the mass of aura of the origin was located, a small white granule appeared. It was only the size of a grain of rice, but it had an almost uncontrollable power. As soon as it appeared, all the spiritual aura madly rushed towards it, covering it bit by bit. The spiritual aura wrapped it layer by layer, almost turning it into a small ball of liquid. However, this wasn't enough. This grain of rice emitted a bright white light, and with an incomparably huge suction force, it swallowed all the spiritual aura. Although this grain of rice was very small, it was unknown how much spiritual aura it could contain. The spiritual aura in the form of liquid was squeezed in, but it only increased a little. Therefore, outside the virtual sky world, countless spiritual aura once again rushed in. Her meridians and dantian once again suffered incomparable pressure. This time, there wasn't only the squeezing force of the spiritual aura, but also the suction force of the white granule. No, this white granule had now become a small ball the size of a thumb. This small ball was still expanding, swallowing the spiritual aura and expanding itself. This process lasted for a long time, maybe several months, maybe several years, but Mo Tiange firmly controlled herself and didn't collapse from the pain. As time passed, the speed at which this small ball absorbed spiritual aura became slower and slower. In the beginning, it was crazy, but in the end, it stabilized. As if it had eaten its fill, its originally faint white color turned into a bright light. Now, It was already the size of a child's fist, emitting a bright and clean light. The process of absorbing spiritual aura stopped. The mass of aura of the origin, which had always been around this small ball, entangled it and firmly wrapped it. Therefore, it turned into a light golden color. The gold core was formed. But this wasn't the end of core formation. The real test was coming. The moment the gold core was formed, Tiange's consciousness was lost in the endless sea of knowledge. Outside the virtual sky world, in the main hall of Shangqing Palace on Clear Spring Peak, two people sat silently. Autumn passed and winter came. All the flowers were withered, but there was still the fragrance of white plums. The maids of Shangqing Palace cut several wintersweet branches and placed them in the hall, filling the hall with their delicate fragrance. It's been 3 years. Lord Daoist Jinghe murmured. His divine comprehension penetrated the pavilions and reached a certain place in the mountain, but he didn't feel anything abnormal except for the spiritual aura fluctuations of foundation building cultivators. A wintersweet branch floated down. She reached out and caught it. The petals immediately fell from his fingers. She spent more than 2 years building her foundation, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to take several years to form her gold core. Lord Daoist Jinghe's gaze shifted, but he still smiled. You're very confident about her. Are you sure she'll succeed in forming her gold core? Maybe she'll be trapped by her inner demon? No. Shi's gaze was calm, and his face was expressionless. She won't be trapped by her inner demon, she definitely won't. In fact, she wasn't like him. His cultivation life was too smooth, so once he faced difficulties, he couldn't get up again. She, on the other hand, went through hardships and walked on dangerous paths. Once she faced difficulties, she resolutely gave up. Chapter 257. Tiange didn't know whether she was dreaming or not. But her fingers were warm, and the air was fragrant. Auntie. She turned around and saw Jinji running towards her. He still had a small and immature appearance. She felt something was wrong, but Jinji had already thrown himself in front of her and hugged her arm with a smile. This soft feeling was real. Auntie, where did you go? I'm already in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. The little Yijinji showed off. She smiled. I went to cultivate. That seemed to be the case, right? She still remembered the feeling of spiritual aura filling her body and breathing in and out. Yijinji pulled her and said with a smile, Auntie, don't you find it annoying that you're always cultivating? Grandmaster said you have to strike a balance between work and rest when doing things. It's not good to cultivate all the time. Come and play with me. This. She said, Grandmaster has Grandmaster's cultivation method, but it's not suitable for everyone. Auntie is only interested in cultivating, and cultivating is the happiest thing for Auntie. But. The little Yijinji lowered his head. She smiled and took Xiaohua out of the spiritual beast bag. Here, Xiaohua will play with you, okay? Go and find Hualing. Don't you play together? All right. Yijinji disappeared in the blink of an eye as if he disappeared into thin air, but she didn't feel anything was wrong. She also didn't go back to cultivate. Instead, she wandered aimlessly in the bright spring sunshine, treading on the morning dew of Clear Spring Peak. She felt as if she had nothing to do, but she also seemed to be waiting for something. The wind blew, and the air was filled with the fragrance of unknown flowers and plants. Someone came walking on the grass with light footsteps and a leisurely manner. Why didn't you call me when you came? He said with a smile. She also smiled and turned her head to look at the tall and straight man with a calm demeanor. His eyebrows were deep as if they were drawn by ink, and the contours of his face were sharp as if they were carved by a knife. However, his facial features were clear and moist, making people fall into them at first glance. He said with a smile, You formed your gold core? She nodded. I've formed my gold core. Without saying anything else, the two of them took each other's arms and walked slowly on the grass. They walked past the bright spring wind, the luxuriant summer wind, the gorgeous autumn light, and the silent winter wind, year after year. Hundreds of years passed hand in hand. They counted the years that passed in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, they had reached the nascent soul and soul formation stage, standing at the peak of the world. He laughed and said, "How about this for the rest of my life? A lifetime? After reaching the soul formation stage, you will have a lifespan of at least 10,000 years. Do you really want to live like this for the rest of your life? I'm willing. If we can ascend, then we'll still be together. If we can't, then so be it." Mo Tiange opened her eyes and stared at the empty virtual sky world. She was alone. The absorption of spiritual energy had already stopped, and his body was quiet. After going through the 10,000 laws of nature formation, she was no longer entangled in the shadows of her childhood, but the secrets in her heart were brought out. Fortunately, she managed to break free in the end. Dreams were beautiful, but reality wasn't that bad. Eternity was just a myth. When the seas dried up and the rocks crumbled, even mortal girls would not believe it. Only the heavenly Tao was eternal. It cycled over and over, growing and multiplying endlessly. Standing up, Zhang Xian flung his sleeves, and a surge of spiritual energy swirled around his sleeves. She was already a core formation cultivator. With a faint smile, she threw the inner demons she once indulged into the past and came out of the virtual sky world. Just as she was about to make some tricks to create a celestial phenomenon similar to core formation to fool her, she heard a sudden clap of thunder in the sky. The sound of wind and thunder rumbled, clouds gathered, and spiritual light flashed. Qin Shi stood up abruptly and spread his divine sense. With a happy and helpless expression, he muttered, "She succeeded in forming her gold core. It was different from when she built her foundation." At that time, spiritual aura gathered, auspicious clouds loomed, and immortal aura lingered. Today, however, when she formed her gold core, the wind and clouds were boundless, and the thunder was like a celebration. None of them knew that the combination of the spiritual roots of the origin from the distant past era, the art of the origin from the distant past era, as well as the cultivation environment from the distant past era, these were the conditions for Mo Tiange to form her gold core, resulted in such a strong celestial phenomenon. For a moment, the entire 7 peaks of Mount Taikang were shrouded in wind and clouds. Countless spiritual aura rushed towards Shangqing Palace on Clear Spring Peak. The weaker aura refining disciples couldn't bear it. Their minds were shaken, and it was difficult for them to breathe. "Is this core formation or soul formation?" someone shouted. One after another, the high-level cultivators of the 6 peaks walked out of their immortals' caves and gazed in the direction of Clear Spring Peak, lost in their thoughts. Among them, Lord Daoist Jinyang gazed at the wind and clouds above Clear Spring Peak and heaved a sigh. Core formation, someone's formed her gold core. Bai Yanfei, who followed beside him, was startled. He asked, "Master, why would core formation produce such a strong celestial phenomenon?" Lord Daoist Jinyang stroked his beard and smiled. "Your martial uncle Jinghe's luck is really good. The disciple he casually accepted is unexpectedly so talented. Presumably, in the future, Clear Spring Peak will have at least 2 more nascent soul cultivators." Bai Yanfei raised his head and looked towards Clear Spring Peak. His gaze was filled with disappointment and envy. Clear Spring Peak again. Could it be that senior martial sister Mo? As he thought about this, he felt even more upset. He originally thought he was the most outstanding disciple of this generation because he had a single spiritual root, but it turned out there had always been someone standing in front of him. He remembered that year on that deserted mountaintop in Clear Spring Peak, the woman who pointed at him, a proud son of heaven, and spoke coldly to him. He was in his 20s, so he was still too young, so he only felt angry and ashamed. However, the passage of time only verified her words one by one. Back then, when he was building his foundation, she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. When he was in the late stage of the foundation building realm, she was already in the core formation realm. Even if he, Bai Yanfei, was extremely talented, he wasn't a real genius in the end. Master said Clear Spring Peak would have 2 more nascent soul cultivators, and one of them should be that Qin Shoujing. Soul formation was never a matter that could be accomplished overnight. He wouldn't be like those short-sighted disciples who thought he was ruined. He was only 200 years old, so he still had a long time to try to form his nascent soul. As for the other one, it was probably this senior martial sister Mo. Later on, he found out that this senior martial sister Mo's talent was even more outstanding than his. What he said that year was all a joke. Mo Tiange walked out of the hut. Her whole body was surrounded by spiritual aura, shining like a rainbow. A small magpie formed from spiritual aura fluttered around her. She smiled and stretched out her finger to touch it lightly. The spiritual magpie scattered and once again turned into spiritual light. She raised her head and saw that the entire Mingxin residence was filled with this kind of extremely beautiful spiritual aura. Through the broken stone wall that let in the sunlight, she could see the same kind of spiritual light that filled the sky, fluttering high in the sky. Half a day later, the sound of wind, thunder, and clouds finally calmed down. The auspicious clouds dispersed, and the spiritual light also quieted down. The disciples of Clear Spring Peak and even all the disciples of Xianqing School learned of one thing. Lord Daoist Jinghe's last disciple, Martial Uncle Mo, formed her gold core and from then on, entered the ranks of core formation cultivators. Mo Tiange hadn't even left Mingxin residence, but she already received countless summoning talismans congratulating her. There were friends she was familiar with, such as Yi Jingguan, Luo Fengxue, Han Xingyu, Kuang Zhu, Zhan Bai, and so on. There were also core formation senior martial brothers and sisters she'd never met before. When she was in the foundation building realm, although she was Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple and only needed to call fellow core formation cultivators senior martial brother or senior martial sister, when she met them, there was still a gap in their realms, so those people only treated her with a bit of courtesy but didn't interact with her. It wasn't until today, when she officially became a core formation cultivator, that these core formation senior martial brothers and sisters finally took out the enthusiasm of a peer and sent congratulatory letters. Mo Tiange read them one by one and sent the same summoning talismans expressing her gratitude. She then walked out of Mingxin residence and entered the main hall. Lord Daoist Jinghe rarely sat upright on the dragon throne and looked at her with a smile. Although he wasn't the one who taught this disciple, he always had a laissez-faire attitude and let her develop as she pleased. Nevertheless, step by step, he guided her in the right direction. Mo Tiange knelt down and kowtowed sincerely. Disciple thanks Master for your 60 years of teaching. Lord Daoist Jinghe accepted her kowtow and gently waved his sleeve, lifting her up. The path of cultivation is rugged and bumpy. You have to experience everything on your own. Master can only guide you this much, you still have to work hard in the future. Yes, disciple will keep it in mind. One after another, Xianqing School disciples learned that the last disciple of Lord Daoist Jinghe of Clear Spring Peak, who was only 84 years old, successfully formed her gold core and entered the ranks of core formation cultivators. After more than 100 years, after Master Daoist Shoujing and Master Daoist Lingxi, Xianqing School once again produced a genius cultivator who formed her gold core within 100 years. For a while, even the news of Master Daoist Lingxi entering closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul was no longer attractive. Because Master Daoist Lingxi also failed to form his nascent soul in the end and had just come out of closed-door meditation. As a result, in just 3 years, the title of the most outstanding genius disciple of Xianqing School's new generation once again changed hands. After Mo Tiange learned about this, she didn't know whether she should shed tears of sympathy for this unfortunate Master Daoist Lingxi or not. In the 100 years when he was supposed to be the most glorious, Qin Shoujing, who was the same age as him, had always been above him. When Qin Shoujing was pulled down from the pedestal, he finally obtained the title of genius, but then she appeared out of nowhere. As for this so-called genius title, Mo Tiange just laughed it off. In the celestial pole, Enchanting school was famous for producing genius cultivators. Lord Daoist Jinyang 1,000 years ago, Lord Daoist Miaoyi several hundred years later, Master Daoist Shoujing and Master Daoist Lingxi more than 100 years ago, and now it was the youngest Mo Tiange and Bai Yanfei. Now, both Qin Shoujing and Li Lingxi encountered setbacks in their soul formation. Bai Yanfei was 82 years old, but he was still in the late stage of the foundation building realm. Presumably, it would take him more than 100 years to form his gold core. Mo Tiange was the only one who successfully formed her gold core at the age of 84. She was only slightly slower than Qin Shoujing, but she was much faster than Li Lingxi. But so what? Although there were very few high-level cultivators in the celestial pole, there were more than 100 nascent soul cultivators. If they couldn't form their nascent soul, they couldn't be called real geniuses. This was the case for Qin Shoujing, Li Lingxi, Mo Tiange, and Bai Yanfei. This was the world of cultivation. Even if it was just a title, it was still very realistic. Tiange, every disciple who forms their gold core must be given a Daoist name. Since you've successfully formed your gold core, we'll choose a day to hold your core formation ceremony to celebrate your success. Master. Mo Tiange was a bit hesitant. I don't want to be so ostentatious. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. It doesn't have to be ostentatious. Any disciple who forms their gold core must do this. At that time, there will be more than one Lord Daoist as your witness. Those who have a master will be given a Daoist name by their master. Those who don't have a master will be given a Daoist name by the head Grand Supreme Elder. You don't need to refuse. Every disciple has to go through this step. Yes. Since he said that, Mo Tiange could only agree. In addition, since you formed your gold core, Master should give you a separate Immortal's Cave. It just so happens that after your martial uncle Xianin forms his nascent soul, no one will take over his Immortal's Cave. From now on, that Immortal's Cave will be given to you. Mo Tiange was pleasantly surprised. Thank you, Master. She knew about Lord Daoist Xuanin's former Immortal's Cave. The main Immortal's Cave was enormous, and there were many small Immortal's Caves surrounding it for disciples to live in. Although the spiritual aura there was slightly inferior to that in Shangqing Palace, its scale was still rare even among core formation cultivators' Immortal's Caves. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. Alright, you've just formed your gold core, so you should go and stabilize your realm first. There are still many things that I'll tell you later. Yes, Master. Chapter 258. The date of the core formation ceremony was soon set. Qin Shoujing and Li Lingxi both failed to form their nascent souls, so the enthusiasm of Xianqing school disciples for cultivating was severely damaged. Mo Tiange just happened to form her gold core at this time, so it was a good time to boost the disciples' morale. Mo Tiange, who originally planned to keep a low profile, finally found that her core formation ceremony was grander than she had imagined. Of course, the core formation ceremony couldn't be compared to the nascent soul ceremony. Not only were cultivators from other cultivation groups not invited, but only cultivators in the foundation building realm and above were invited to the ceremony. As for aura refining disciples, they could come, but there was no requirement if they didn't come. However, this kind of ceremony usually only had one or two nascent soul cultivators and half of the core formation cultivators at most. This time, however, all 5 nascent soul cultivators except for Lord Daoist Huayan who was in closed-door meditation showed up. More than 40 core formation cultivators, except for those who were traveling or in closed-door meditation, also showed up, so it naturally looked grand. The core formation ceremony had always been held by cultivators from one of the 6 peaks, so Mo Tiange's ceremony was naturally held on Clear Spring Peak. For this reason, the Steward's Hall of Clear Spring Peak chose the largest Ningxin Hall and decorated it with lanterns and streamers to make it grand. On that day, snowflakes drifted down from Clear Spring Peak in winter, filling the sky with flying snow as if it was another form of celebration. Mo Tiange had long changed into the new Daoist robe sent by the Steward's Hall. She wore a white robe, a light blue buttoned robe, and a blue and white robe with innate trigrams and taiji cloud patterns on the collar and sleeves. She also wore a hibiscus crown. She didn't need any extra decorations, she already looked like an immortal, dignified, and elegant. For some reason, after she formed her gold core, although her appearance was no different from before, she was obviously more elegant and beautiful than when she was in the aura refining or foundation building realm. When she asked, Lord Daoist Jingha answered, "You cultivate the Sunu art of the origin, which partly comes from the art of Sunu. Doesn't the art of Sunu keep a woman young and beautify her appearance? I think it's because of this technique." Since she had formed her gold core, she didn't care about this. In any case, no matter how her appearance changed, it would be difficult for cultivators to think she was devastatingly beautiful. At most, they would praise her. By the time Mo Tiange arrived at Ningxin Hall, several hundred cultivators in the foundation building realm and above had already gathered inside the hall. Outside the hall, there were also countless aura-refining disciples braving the wind and snow to come and watch. With a smile on her face, she walked into Tranquil Heart Palace. The four nascent Soul Dao lords stood at the very front, while Sect Master Shen led dozens of core formation elders to their sides. Behind these elders were many foundation establishment disciples. The nascent Soul Dao lords were all delighted. For the sake of the nascent Soul Dao lords, the elders revealed smiles on their faces even though they did not think much about it. As for the foundation establishment cultivators behind them, they were both envious and jealous. Not long ago, Mo Tiange was just a foundation building cultivator like them. Now, however, she reached the sky in a single bound and became a high-level cultivator. This was only a core formation celebration, so there was no need for Lord Daoist Jinyang to personally preside over it. Sect head Shen would be the one to do it. Upon seeing Mo Tiange coming in, school head Shen led her to the front of the three Pure Ones patriarchs in the hall. He hinted for her to kneel, kowtow, and offer incense. Then he said loudly, Mo Tiange, a disciple of Xianqing School's Clear Spring Peak, has formed her gold core today and advanced into the core formation realm. According to Xianqing School's rules, she is now conferred the position of an elder. Sect head Shen was also a core formation cultivator, so Mo Tiange didn't need to kneel to him. She only performed a Dao salute to show her respect. Then she took the identity tablet of an elder with both hands, as well as the first offering after she formed her gold core. After she accepted the identity tablet of an elder, Sect head Shen smiled and said, "Junior Martial Sister Mo, from now on, you're an elder of Xianqing School. When there's nothing to do, you can enjoy the sect's offerings every year. When there's something to do, I hope you can protect Xianqing School's interests and reputation." "Yes, I'll obey Senior Martial Brother Sect Head's order." Sect Head Shen continued, "Since you've advanced into the core formation realm, according to Xianqing School's rules, please grant me a Daoist name." Right after he finished speaking, someone immediately placed a praying mat in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe. Mo Tiange took a few steps forward and knelt on the praying mat. Lord Daoist Jinghe said with a solemn expression, "My disciple, Tiange, you're extremely talented and intelligent. You also have a firm Dao heart and great wisdom. Now that you've formed your gold core, you mustn't be arrogant and complacent. You must know that you haven't reached the great Dao yet. In the future, you must still work hard and mustn't slack off." Whenever a disciple made a realm breakthrough, they'd always be praised, but very few people would say the words, "extremely talented." Lord Daoist Jinghe relied entirely on her spiritual roots of the origin, which were only seen once every several thousand years, so he used the words, "extremely talented." Presumably, there really weren't any cultivators in the world who were more talented than her. Of course, those deification cultivators who'd been born a long time ago didn't count. Disciple will sincerely follow master's instructions. Lord Daoist Jinghe revealed a faint smile. He stroked his short beard with his right hand and muttered, "The path to the great Tao is filled with untold hardships. The divine path is indistinct, and the immortal path is boundless. You seek the immortal path, and your state of mind can only be described as tranquility. You should also seek the subtlety of the Tao. You mustn't act rashly, and you should keep a calm heart. Therefore, Master bestows upon you the Taoist named Qingwei. Mo Tianga's gaze flickered, but her face remained expressionless. She lightly kowtowed. Qingwei thanks Master for bestowing the name. Lord Taoist Jinghe nodded with a smile. Upon seeing this, school head Shen took over. I've already kowtowed to thank Master for his kindness. Junior Marshal Sister Qingwei, please rise. Mo Tianga once again saluted him, then stood up. She was led to the center by school head Shen, and school head Shen announced loudly, Disciples, I hereby announce that Clear Spring Peak disciple Mo Tianga has been bestowed a name by her master, Lord Taoist Jinghe. From now on, her name is Master Taoist Qingwei. Once school head Shen finished speaking, the core formation cultivators standing on both sides congratulated her. Congratulations to Junior Marshal Sister Qingwei for advancing to the core formation realm. Then, all the foundation building disciples saluted her one after another. Disciple congratulates Marshal Uncle Qingwei. Outside the hall, the voices of the aura refining disciples came from afar. Disciple congratulates Master Taoist Qingwei. Even though her mood was calm, Mo Tianga still felt a bit excited when she heard the loud and powerful congratulations. After holding the core formation ceremony and being bestowed a Taoist name by her master, she was now an elder of Xianqing school. Mo Tianga's eyes became slightly moist. She took her first step towards becoming a high-level cultivator, and she couldn't help but think of some people she lost in her 80-plus years of life. Her mother who raised her alone, her father whom she never met, her second uncle who sacrificed his life for her, and Tian Xiao who was implicated by her. If they knew about this, they would definitely be very happy, right? She was now a core formation cultivator and an elder of Xianqing School, one of the best cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. She no longer needed to hide from place to place and didn't need to tremble in fear. She could walk under the sun with her head held high. The core formation ceremony ended. In the wind and snow, the aura refining and foundation building disciples left one after another. The nascent soul cultivators also returned to their immortals' caves, leaving only the core formation cultivators to make friends with the new junior martial sister Qingwei. In the past, although this junior martial sister was Lord Taoist Jinghe's disciple, she was still a foundation building cultivator after all, so they didn't need to interact much. But things were different now. This junior martial sister successfully advanced to the core formation realm at such a young age. It was said that her talent was rarely seen in 1,000 years, and she also had a protective master like Lord Taoist Jinghe. Presumably, her future was bright, so it wouldn't be wrong to interact more with her. Mo Tianga was trapped in the crowd and couldn't get away, so she could only cheer up and socialize with these senior martial brothers and sisters from the same sect. Who said cultivators should be detached from worldly affairs? They left the secular world, but they were still entangled with worldly affairs. On a mountain top on Clear Spring Peak, a man stood in the wind and snow with his hands behind his back. He was silently gazing in the direction of Ningxin Hall. The flying snow fell on his black hair and seeped into his blue clothes and white robe, but he didn't move at all. Lord Taoist Jinghe landed behind him and walked towards him while stepping on the ground full of broken jade. Why didn't you go to the core formation ceremony? A snowflake fell and covered his eyelashes, but it soon melted, leaving him with a bone-chilling coldness. He moved his gaze and said in a hoarse voice, "What if I went?" Nothing. Lord Taoist Jinghe was in a very good mood. Ignoring Qin Shi's gloomy mood, he walked to Qin Shi's side and smiled. "Won't you also go when other people form their gold cores?" Qin Shi didn't answer. He wasn't stupid. This master obviously came to tease him, so why should he answer and deliver himself to his master's doorstep? The two of them stood in the wind and snow for a while in silence. After a while, Qin Shi suddenly said, "The path to the great Tao is filled with untold hardships. The divine path is indistinct, and the immortal path is boundless. It's subtle, mysterious, and unfathomable. You seek the immortal path, and your state of mind can only be described as tranquility. You should also seek the subtle Tao. You mustn't act rashly, and you should maintain tranquility with a calm heart. Therefore, Master bestowed upon you the Taoist name of Shoujing. Master, when you bestowed a Taoist name to your disciple, did you specifically choose to say these words? Lord Taoist Jinghe laughed hollowly. Hee, when you were young, didn't you participate in your senior martial brother Qing Yuan's core formation ceremony? That was a long time ago. He only vaguely remembered that his master didn't say these words at that time. Sure enough, even during a solemn core formation ceremony, this dirty old man couldn't help but play around. But what was the use of doing this? He was just like a child. What wasn't his would never be his. Qin Shi shook his head. From now on, there's only Mo Qingwei, not Mo Tiange. His voice was flat, but it carried an indescribable sadness. Lord Taoist Jinghe couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at him. Brat. I'm really old, I don't understand anymore. Didn't I teach you that if you want something, you should look for it, take it, or even rob it? As the saying goes, cultivating is fine as long as you don't go against your heart. Who told you to be so dilly-dallying and pestering? Since Tiange has formed her gold core, the distance between the two of you is already very close. Why do you still feel even more despair? Qin Shi chuckled. In the wind and snow, his laughter carried a chilliness that could freeze one's heart. Master, why did she form her gold core? Because her heart doesn't care about anything, and she doesn't even want anything. Lord Taoist Jinghe was stunned, but he seemed to understand a little. You mean, she doesn't care about you? What other explanation is there? He was disheartened and lowered his head. I'm trapped by my inner demon. I tried to form my nascent soul 3 times, but I couldn't make any progress. She, on the other hand, was unmoved and smoothly formed her gold core. You and I both know how difficult it is for cultivators who form their gold core for the first time and have never experienced inner demon, but she easily passed this hurdle. Lord Taoist Jinghe was speechless. For cultivators who formed their gold core for the first time and encountered inner demon for the first time, having a connection in their heart would be magnified infinitely. They would be intoxicated by it and wouldn't know how to get out. But Tiange. She couldn't have reached the realm of supreme indifference, could she? Master, what should I do? If this goes on, I won't be able to form my nascent soul in 10 or 100 years even if my lifespan ends. Lord Taoist Jinghe felt he couldn't answer this question. This was the first time this child asked him what to do in such a confused tone. In the past 100 years, he never needed other people's help. He walked on the path of seeking immortality and seeking Tao alone. He suddenly felt that meeting Tiange was really a disaster for him. Chapter 259. With a new immortal's cave, Mo Tiange moved again. Fortunately, she didn't have many things. The important things were either in her Qinkuan bag or in the virtual sky world. She simply packed up her usual belongings and moved to Lord Taoist Xuanin's original immortal's cave without moving the tables and chairs. When she first came to Clear Spring Peak, she lived in the small immortal's cave next to Lord Taoist Xuanin's. That was the first decent immortal's cave she lived in. Now, she returned to her hometown as the master of the main immortal's cave. Lord Taoist Xuanin moved to Sweet Dew Peak a long time ago, and all his disciples also moved away. Such a large immortal's cave now belonged to her alone. Although she knew Xianqing School, as a big cultivation group in the Celestial Pole, treated high-level cultivators very generously, giving her an immortal's cave of this size to a cultivator who'd just formed her gold core. Mo Tiange knew this was because Lord Taoist Jinghe loved her so much. Thinking up to this point, she smiled. How fortunate was her life. Although she lost a lot of things, she also obtained a lot of equally precious things. After advancing to the core formation realm, because she didn't have any disciples for the time being, the steward's hall asked her and sent several foundation building disciples to tidy up her immortal's cave. If she didn't mind, she could stay and continue to handle chores. In Enchanting school, if a foundation building cultivator wasn't an elite disciple, the disciples' rations were far from enough for their cultivation, so they usually sought some errands. Even for elite disciples, if their master's status wasn't high and they didn't receive many rewards, the disciples' rations wouldn't be enough for their cultivation. When Mo Tiange first entered Enchanting school, she was brought back by Lord Daoist Jinghe's beloved disciple, Master Daoist Shoujing. She was also accepted as his registered disciple and was taught by Master Daoist Xianin, so she never had to worry about spirit stones. But ordinary elite disciples weren't so lucky. Luo Fengxue had errands in the steward's hall and was favored by her master, so she had a lot of spirit stones. Yi Jingwen would occasionally take errands to earn some spirit stones for his cultivation. This was also the case when he was ordered to go to the secular world to bring her back to Enchanting school. For foundation building disciples, the best job was to enter the steward's hall and become a steward. Not only did they have a bit of authority, but they also had a stable income of spirit stones. However, the downside was that they couldn't go into closed-door cultivation for long periods of time, which would affect their cultivation. The only thing they lacked was handling some chores for the school. There were some things that the aura-refining disciples didn't feel at ease handing over to them if their cultivation levels were low, so they, the foundation-building disciples, would have to handle them. If they wanted to enter closed-door meditation, they only needed to ask for a leave of absence or entrust it to someone else. The downside was that there wouldn't be too many spirit stones and it wasn't stable. There was another job that was both good and bad, and that was to help core formation cultivators. To say that it was good was even better than the first method. He could meet a core formation cultivator, and if he did well, he might even be rewarded. How could a core formation cultivator be so easy to serve? If they encountered one or two with a bad temper, not only would they torment them, but they would also deduct their spirit stones. Moreover, generally speaking, core formation cultivators all had disciples under them. They would let their disciples do all the good work, leaving them with only some menial tasks. However, for a core formation cultivator like Mo Tiange, who had just formed her gold core, didn't have any disciples, had an extraordinary identity, and had Lord Daoist Jinghe as her backer, working for her was a very good job. She had just formed her gold core and didn't have any disciples, so she wouldn't be too picky. They also had good jobs. With a backer, they were confident and generous when it came to rewards. However, just like Martial Uncle Shoujing in the past, the current Martial Uncle Qingwei's Immortal's Cave wasn't that easy to enter. One had to have some connections in the steward's hall to be recommended. Mo Tiange looked at the cultivators recommended by the steward's hall. Sure enough, most of them were disciples of her senior martial brothers and sisters, and a small portion also had some connections, which gave her a bit of a headache. She thought about it. Back then, senior martial brother Shoujing didn't seem to like other people entering his Immortal's Cave, so when he needed disciples to handle chores, he just picked a few from his senior martial brothers and sisters' disciples. However, she didn't have that kind of obsession with cleanliness. Although she also didn't like noise, her Immortal's Cave was very big, so it wouldn't be good if there was no one to manage it. It was just that it was really hard for her to handle so many people. She didn't know who had connections and whether it would matter if she refused them. Therefore, Mo Tiange sent a summoning talisman to ask Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue had seen this kind of thing a lot, so she should be able to give her some good advice. Before long, Luo Fengxue replied, "If you don't like it, just refuse. You don't have to worry about offending others. You're Grandmaster's official disciple now and you've advanced to the core formation realm, so the martial uncles won't blame you for this. If you're too lazy to deal with it, just list out the chores and hand them over to the steward's hall. The steward's hall will take good care of them for you." Mo Tiange suddenly saw the light. Right. Now that she formed her gold core, she wasn't only Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple, but she was also an elder at Enchanting school. Why should she be afraid of offending others? Those senior martial brothers and sisters definitely wouldn't blame her for a few little disciples, and the steward's hall should also try to please her. If she told them something, they definitely wouldn't dare to neglect it. With a plan in mind, Mo Tienga listed out the chores she needed to deal with and handed them to the steward's hall steward. She told him which ones needed foundation building disciples and which ones didn't need to be restricted by their cultivation levels. As for the selection of people and the cost of spirit stones, she left them all to the steward. She also told him that she didn't like being disturbed by others and that there should be as few people as possible. The steward accepted her orders and left. Sure enough, he handled everything properly. Mo Tienga was delighted and rewarded him with a lot of things. Coincidentally, she entered the 10,000 laws of nature formation before she formed her gold core and obtained a lot of spiritual plants. When she was in a coma, those spiritual plants were handed over by Yijinji. She was lucky, so the rewards for those spiritual plants were very generous. Later, when she woke up, she wanted to just leave them to Jinji, but Jinji firmly refused. He said he already had a share for his master's disciple and that his aunt was only in the foundation building realm, so she shouldn't take so many things from him. Mo Tienga gave it some thought and gave up. These spiritual plants had always been kept in her Qinkuan bag, so she could use them to reward these disciples. Seeing that she was really generous, these disciples who came to do chores became even more diligent. As she thought about Yijinji, Mo Tienga sat in her new immortal's cave in a daze for a while. When she and Qin were both in closed-door meditation, Yijinji went down the mountain by himself. He said his cultivation level had already reached the peak of the early stage of the foundation building realm, but his mental state wasn't experienced enough, so he should go out and gain experience. In the end, he still had a master now, and Qin didn't object, so Mo Tienga didn't say anything and let him go. Besides, Jinji really didn't have enough experience, so it wouldn't be good to keep him by her side all the time. She thought about it. Although her cultivation path could be considered smooth since she came to Xianqing school, how many things had she experienced in her childhood? She had long cultivated her firm and courageous character. Jinji, however, wasn't like that. His cultivation path was too smooth, so he practically didn't have any mental state experience. If he didn't go out and gain experience, he wouldn't be able to grow. Later on, during her 16-year closed-door meditation, Jinji came back once. At that time, she was still in closed-door meditation, and Qin was also in closed-door meditation. Jinji stayed for 2 years before he left the mountain again. This time, he still hadn't come back. After careful calculation, he hadn't come back for 8 years. Mo Tienga couldn't help but feel a bit worried. There hadn't been any news from Jinji for 8 years. Did something happen to him? He did leave his blood essence and kept it with Qin, but Qin didn't say anything, so presumably, he was fine. But where did Jinji go in the end? He clearly knew she was going to form her gold core soon, but he unexpectedly didn't come back for 8 years. This was too unusual. With this thought in mind, Mo Tienga sent a summoning talisman to the steward's hall, asking them to find Yijinji's whereabouts. Maybe this child was trapped somewhere and needed help. Aside from the immortal's cave and Jinji, there was another matter that gave Mo Tienga a headache. She advanced to the core formation realm at the age of 84, which once again caused a sensation in West Kunwu. Many cultivators from other cultivation groups came to congratulate her. If she refused to meet them, she'd be putting on airs. But if she met them, she really couldn't stand these social interactions. In the end, it was Luo Fengxue who gave her a suggestion. Martial Uncle Shoujing was also like this when he formed his gold core. He used stabilizing his realm as an excuse to enter closed-door meditation and let the steward's disciples handle it. No one can say anything about this reason, so you might as well do it. Mo Tienga suddenly understood. Yes, after a cultivator advanced, the most important thing was to stabilize their realm. If she said that, other people couldn't blame her. After she told the steward's disciples what Luo Fengxue said, Mo Tienga obediently stayed in her room. This was to avoid these troubles and also because she really needed to stabilize her realm. After advancing to the core formation realm, Mo Tienga could now openly take out 2 foundation building puppets. With her identity as a core formation cultivator and with Lord Daoist Jinghe as her backer, having two foundation building puppets would only surprise people a little. In addition to stabilizing her realm, there was another very important matter. It was time for her to refine her natal magic weapon. She had already given the refining formula for the Heaven and Earth fan to Lord Daoist Jinghe for evaluation. Lord Daoist Jinghe was full of praise for this magic weapon formula. When he learned it was created by a female cultivator several thousand years ago, he was even more fascinated. Thinking back to that era, he wished he could go back and have a chat with primordial Lady Bishui. Mo Tiange didn't mention that primordial Lady Bishui was her ancestor, Mo Yaoqing. She only briefly mentioned what happened in Linhai and focused on Ren Yufeng. She also gave the stone tablet she obtained from Ren Yufeng to Lord Daoist Jinghe to study. Since Lord Daoist Jinghe praised this Heaven and Earth fan so much, Mo Tiange planned to refine it as her natal magic weapon. These materials were hard to find in Linhai, but it wasn't impossible in the Celestial Pole. There were a few materials that were hard to find, so she had to spend a lot of money. Coupled with her connections in Xianqing School, there was still hope, so Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't object. Mo Tiange asked Lord Daoist Jinghe about some materials she didn't know about and informed the Steward's Hall to spread the news and try to find them. Among them, the most difficult to find were chalcedony over 1,000 years old and a piece of Qian stone. Although the other supplementary materials were few, as long as she offered a high price, there was still hope. These two things, on the other hand, could only be found by chance. Among them, Mo Tiange didn't know what Qian stone was. When she asked Lord Daoist Jinghe, he only said he read about it in ancient books and never saw it in reality. For this reason, Mo Tiange specially told the Steward's Hall that if there was a Qian stone, they should buy it no matter the price. In any case, with her current net worth, she could afford the heaven realm ordinary people talked about. Even if she really didn't have enough spirit stones, she still had a master behind her. After advancing to the core formation realm, in addition to refining her natal magic weapon, she also had to change cultivation techniques for the core formation realm and take spiritual herbs for the core formation realm. But Mo Tiange didn't need to worry about this. The Taiyuan record Zhong Muling gave her could be practiced until the deification realm, and the Sunu art of the origin could also be practiced until the nascent soul realm. Zhong Muling once said that if she practiced the Sunu art of the origin and entered the deification realm, she could naturally create her own cultivation technique according to her own unique conditions, so she didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques. Needless to say, she didn't even need to concoct spiritual herbs in the short term. Originally, she concocted a lot of soul-solidifying pills and clear sky pills to practice. In addition, after she formed her gold core, the school would reward her with a lot of medicinal pills and spirit stones, which would at least allow her to practice in closed-door meditation for several years without worrying about medicinal pills. Therefore, in the following time, she continued to cultivate and stabilize her realm while waiting for news about the materials for the Heaven and Earth fan. Of course, she could also collect magic weapons. After all, a core formation cultivator's ability in fights of magical power depended on magic weapons. Chapter 260. As they cultivated and waited, a year passed slowly. Mo Qingwei's name was now well known in West Kunwu. She was the most talented cultivator in Xianqing School after Qin Shoujing. Her talent surpassed those with single spiritual roots and she had a great chance of advancing to the nascent soul realm. She definitely wasn't a fake genius like Qin Shoujing. Mo Tiange felt a bit bitter when she heard this news. Although she knew that person certainly didn't care about the title of genius, he was originally held in high regard. Now that he fell down like this, it was too cruel. Moreover, he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times before. Mo Tiange recalled the conversation they once had in Yinwu sect. At that time, she was in a bad mood. The people she could talk to were all dead and scattered. In the end, he was the only one left. That afternoon, they drank some wine. In a daze, she listened to him talk about some things. This memory was covered up by him using magic at that time. Now that she was also a core formation cultivator, this memory finally broke free and appeared in her mind. He said his aptitude wasn't the best, but he had never encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation. Maybe he was born to cultivate, so he didn't have any obsessions or attachments. In other words, he didn't have any superfluous feelings. Therefore, in this life, he just wanted to walk on the path to immortality like this. That being the case, even if he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times, he wouldn't lose confidence, right? But why did Master say he was haunted by a demonic barrier? Mo Tiange didn't think too much about things she couldn't figure out. Although she wasn't a decisive person, she wouldn't keep dwelling on things she'd already figured out. A year passed. Her cultivation level was almost stable, so she started to prepare magic weapons. Once she formed her gold core, she had to give up most of the fighting methods in the foundation building realm. In the core formation realm, she could develop the true power of magic weapons, so fights between core formation cultivators were actually fights between magic weapons. She had a few magic tools on her that needed to be replaced, so she encountered a major problem. Her magic weapons were only defensive or auxiliary magic weapons. Her attacks depended entirely on magic weapons, but she didn't have any offensive magic weapons right now. This problem made Mo Tiange hesitate for a few days. If she bought them, she definitely wouldn't be able to refine them herself. If she refined them, it would be too troublesome. In the end, it was Lord Daoist Jinghe who inadvertently asked about it and bestowed her with several magic weapons that finally solved this problem. Ever since she became his disciple in the aura refining realm, Lord Daoist Jinghe had never bestowed her with magic weapons or magic tools. He always said the treasures she possessed were too extravagant for a foundation-building cultivator, so there was simply no need to give her anything else. Mo Tiange also felt that she didn't lack anything, so she didn't ask for anything. However, there was a world of difference between core formation and foundation building. As a core formation cultivator, the treasures she had were completely insufficient. Lord Daoist Jinghe finally made his move, and because of this, he even said complacently that in the end, she still couldn't leave him, her master. Look, no matter how many fortuitous encounters she had, she still wanted him to bestow her with treasures. Mo Tiange resisted the urge to roll her eyes at him, but when she thought about it, she felt it was funny. Speaking of which, this master had always treated her extremely well. He had never been stingy with what he had given her, but he had never been able to make her feel grateful. He would rather give her things like this and let her say a few words. However, this was also his valuable point. He didn't treat his disciples with a benevolent attitude, and when he bestowed treasures, he also didn't ask for gratitude. In any case, the magic weapons Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her could be considered to have solved her urgent problem. Among them, there was a sword, a square seal, and a jade bottle. All of them were offensive magic weapons. The sword belonged to metal, the square seal belonged to earth, and the jade bottle belonged to water. Although they were all things Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't need, they were all high grade. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. In the end, she benefited a lot from her master. As a cultivator from a cultivation group, she had a much easier time compared to individual cultivators. Otherwise, she didn't know how many spirit stones and energy she would have to spend to refine magic weapons. Back then, she had an elder-like second uncle, but it was already very difficult for her to earn spirit stones for her cultivation. If she was alone, how could she possibly concentrate on cultivating like she was now? After a while, when Mo Tiange had refined several magic weapons to the point where they could be used, she heard a piece of big news. Master. Upon hearing the news, Mo Tiange immediately rushed back to Shangqing Palace. Once she stepped into the main hall, she was stunned. Qin Shi was also in the hall. He was currently sitting in the seat she usually sat on, drinking tea with his eyes lowered. When he heard her voice, he didn't even raise his head to look at her. Mo Tiange quickly reacted. She first greeted Lord Daoist Jinghe, then greeted him. Senior Marshal Brother Shoujing. She held the teacup and only responded softly. He still didn't look at her, as if he was only drinking tea. With their qualifications and cultivation levels, it wasn't rude of him to act like this. Not to mention that his cultivation level was much higher than Tianga's, just based on their seniority in the school. He was worthy of her greeting since he entered the school many years earlier. However, his attitude made Tianga feel a bit embarrassed. It seemed, he really didn't like seeing her. This embarrassment flashed past her heart. Tianga turned around and asked, "Master, is that thing true?" Lord Daoist Jinghe seemed to not see the awkwardness between the two of them. He was holding a jade slip and reading something. Upon hearing her question, he put down the jade slip and said, "Of course it's true. Is Master joking with you?" Upon hearing his affirmation, Tianga was both happy and anxious, but she was also a bit nervous. "Master, what's the situation now?" Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her, then at Qin Shi. He said, "I called you here because I knew you must be very concerned about this matter. This happened about a month ago. I also have several friends in Tiandao sect. After they discovered the abnormality, they wanted to look for treasures, so they came to invite me." Tiandao sect. In that case, the news should be correct. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled, and his eyes lit up. Those old guys probably don't have the guts to deceive us nascent soul cultivators. Even if Tiandao sect is the #1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, our Xianqing school isn't easy to bully. Besides, they didn't only inform us, but they also informed many other nascent soul cultivators. Several of my other friends all received the news. "Master." Qin Shi finally put down the teacup in his hand and looked at Lord Daoist Jinghe. "Since it's most likely true, do you plan to go?" "Of course," Lord Daoist Jinghe said. Lord Daoist Jinghe said, "When you went to Demonic Mountain that year, I didn't go with you because I happened to reach a crucial moment in my cultivation, but those old geezers took the lead. Now that Demonic Mountain is open, how could I not go?" And Qin Shi wasn't surprised at all. "Master, what other news did you get? Tell me all at once." Lord Daoist Jinghe threw the jade slip in his hand to him. "Take a look yourselves." Qin Shi took the jade slip and looked at it for a while with a profound gaze. He then threw the jade slip to Tianga and picked up the teacup again, lost in thought. Tianga took the jade slip and couldn't wait to read it. This jade slip was a communication jade slip from a nascent soul cultivator named Daoist Haifeng from Tiandao sect to Lord Daoist Jinghe. The content was very simple. It told Lord Daoist Jinghe that the restrictions on Demonic Mountain had weakened and would open soon, and he invited him to go with him. Tiandao sect was close to Demonic Mountain and fought against the Devil Path. These days, they found that the restrictions on Demonic Mountain showed signs of loosening. According to past experience, the restrictions in some places continued to weaken, and after 6 months to a year, entrances would appear. Reportedly, Demonic Mountain was the battlefield of the Great War between immortals and devils in ancient times. As far back as millions of years ago and as far back as hundreds of thousands of years ago, there were the remains of many cultivators and devil cultivators. If they could find a few of those treasures, they'd be incredible in the current era. Moreover, Demonic Mountain's terrain was special. Not to mention the whole celestial pole, it was probably impossible to find such a special place in the whole world. There were some special spiritual objects that couldn't be found anywhere else. Therefore, every time the restrictions on Demonic Mountain weakened, countless cultivators would rush to Mount Yuheng of Tiandao sect, wanting to get a share of the loot. Of course, it was very dangerous there. The last time the restrictions weakened was about 80 or 90 years ago. Most of the people who entered Demonic Mountain died, and Tianga's father, Yi Hai, was one of them. Although it was so dangerous, people in the whole celestial pole still flocked to it like ducks. Demonic Mountain's restrictions simply didn't have any rules when they weakened. It might not happen even once in several hundred years. Not to mention aura refining and foundation building cultivators, even core formation cultivators might not encounter it even once in their entire lives. In contrast to the huge risks, there were huge fated chances. It was said that Master Song Feng, the first late nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, obtained a lot of treasures on Demonic Mountain and was able to cultivate a strange and invincible cultivation technique. But apart from Master Song Feng, almost no one would enter Demonic Mountain alone. Because if they wanted to enter safely, they had to be very familiar with the formations and restrictions, and they also had to have a strong fighting ability. None of these things could be possessed by one person. Demonic Mountain was really too big. Even if tens of thousands of people went in, it might still be very difficult to meet them, let alone several thousand people. Therefore, every time the restriction on Heavenly Devil Mountain weakened, Tiandao sect's cultivators would invite their friends to explore it instead of their own sect directly taking care of it. Of course, Tiandao sect was established next to Demonic Mountain to confront the Devil Path, so Demonic Mountain was like their back garden. If others wanted to go in, they had to give them some benefits. After Mo Tiange finished reading, she returned the jade slip to Lord Daoist Jinghe and lowered her head in contemplation. Lord Daoist Jinghe would definitely go. Ever since Mo Tiange worshipped him as her master, he had already reached the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, but he hadn't had a fated chance to break through to the late stage. Now was a good opportunity. Besides, he liked taking risks. Qin Shi also had to go. After failing to form his nascent soul 3 times, he urgently needed a fated chance to break through. Back then, he was only a little over 100 years old, but he was already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. He was at the height of his success, but he still took the risk to enter Demonic Mountain. How could he let go of this opportunity now? But Mo Tiange herself was a bit hesitant. In terms of cultivation level, although she was already in the core formation realm and took the first step to become a high-level cultivator, it was only the first step. She hadn't even refined her natal magic weapon yet, and as a core formation cultivator, her fighting ability wasn't enough. In addition, she was still young and had the virtual sky world as her backing, so she didn't need to look for any fated chances at all. As long as she cultivated slowly, it wasn't impossible for her to reach the nascent soul realm. But regardless of fated chances, Demonic Mountain had a reason to attract her. Her father was buried on Demonic Mountain. When she was in the aura refining realm, she thought she would find a chance to go to Demonic Mountain after she formed her gold core and bring her father's remains back. Now, she finally had such an opportunity. If she let it go, she didn't know how many years it would be before Demonic Mountain opened again. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.